Do you worry a lot? Do you know somebody who does worry a lot? Well, this is the ultimate guide for understanding, managing, and better controlling worries. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the ultimate video guide for managing worry. This video is going to be a long video that puts together a number of other videos that I've previously uploaded that spell out the best ways to manage and understand excessive worry. But before I get into that, just a couple of disclaimers to go over. I'm a registered psychologist in the province of British Columbia, Canada, and this video is for informational purposes only. It is not intended as a replacement or substitute for advice from your doctor or mental health professional. Now, with those two things out of the way, let's talk about worry management. So like I mentioned, this video is really a compilation of a 14-part video series that I've previously uploaded about worry management. You can choose to watch all 14 of those individual videos, but I had a lot of people ask me to put them all together into one video that they can use as a reference. And so that's what this video is all about. I would not recommend watching this video from beginning to end and expecting to remember all of it. It is pretty dense and has a lot of material in it, but I hope you'll come back to it as you work through some of the worry management tools that I'm going to be talking about. Now, one of the things I want to point out is these worry management skills aren't things that I just dreamed up. These are worry management skills that are backed by a lot of research, and there's been a lot of scientific work that has been put into putting together this treatment protocol. It was developed by a brilliant researcher and psychologist at Concordia University named Michel Dugas, and he has done a lot of research on these skills and tools that I'll be presenting. And the great part is these skills and tools work, and there's a lot of research to back that these tools are highly effective for helping a person manage and understand their worry. So I hope you'll find this video helpful and look forward to any comments or thoughts that you have about it. So with that being said, let's start with the first video that discusses the 3 features of worry and 2 different types of worry. Have you ever thought about what worry actually is? Now, that's one of the first questions I ask my clients when we get into worry management is I ask them to provide me with a definition of worry. And usually there's a bit of a pause and a look of confusion because I think most people know what worry feels like. And everybody knows kind of how it feels to be worried. But rarely do people ever stop to think about what worry actually is. And that's what I want to talk about today so that people can have a clear sense and a clear idea of what I'm talking about when I talk about worry. So, the first thing about worry is that worry is a thought process. It is something that happens in your head, it is something that you are thinking. Now, worry tends not to be just a single thought. It tends to be a collection of thoughts. Now, that can be the same thought looped over and over and over and over again, or it can be one thought leading to another, leading to another, leading to another until you get this scenario building. Now, for example, I wake up one morning, I've got a really bad headache, and I think to myself, what if this is a brain tumor? What if there's something wrong? Now, typically with worry, the next thought isn't, well, I wonder what I'm going to have for breakfast. The next thought is either going to be looping over, oh my goodness, what if this is a tumor? What if this is cancer? What if this is something bad? Or spiraling into a negative scenario about what might happen if I have to get treatment and what would happen to my family, those types of things. So the first sort of defining feature of worry is that it is a collection of thoughts. It is a thought process and a collection of multiple thoughts. The second defining characteristic of worry is that worry tends to be future oriented. And what that means is that people don't worry about things from the past typically. They worry about stuff that's going to happen in the future. Now, sometimes people will stop me and they'll say, oh, hold on a second. I worry about things from my past. But usually when people say that they're worrying about stuff from their past, what they're actually talking about is they're worrying about how the things from the past are going to affect them in the future. So essentially, how the implications of events that have happened in the past and what impact they're going to have on a person's future. So for example, if I'm worrying about having been fired from a job 3 years ago, it's not so much that I'm worrying about having been fired from the job 3 years ago. It's that I'm worrying about how I'm going to be able to explain that I was fired from that job 3 years ago in the upcoming job interview. So now another small but sort of obvious component of this is that worry tends to be about future negative events. People don't worry about positive things happening, right? So rarely do people ever worry, oh, what if this job goes really well? Or what if this relationship turns out great? What if my friends are really impressed with me? People don't worry about those things. People usually only worry about negative things happening. So that's the second defining feature of worry. Worry is about future negative events. Now, the third defining feature of worry is that worry is associated and accompanied by anxiety. Anxiety is the emotional result of the worry process. Now, this is an important concept, an important point, because a lot of times people will use the terms worry and anxiety interchangeably. I'm worried and anxious. And that's probably because people usually experience worry and anxiety at the same time. But worry and anxiety aren't the same thing. Worry is a thought process, and anxiety is the emotion that results from that thought process. So you can't be worrying without being anxious, but you can be anxious without worrying. So I hope that makes sense, that worry is the thought process, anxiety is the emotional result that comes from that thought process. So that's the definition of worry that I work by. That's the definition of worry that I use when I'm working with my clients on worry management. Worry is this collection of thoughts or doubts about future negative events that are accompanied by anxiety. So with that definition of worry out of the way, I want to talk about two types of worry. Now, the first type of worry is what we call a type 1 worry. Now, a type 1 worry is a worry about a current, actual, real problem. A problem that's happening now, a problem that I am dealing with in this moment. So for example, I get my credit card bill in the mail, and the credit card bill is for $300, but I only have $20 in my bank account. And so I start to worry, how is it that I'm going to be able to pay this credit card bill? So that worry about being able to pay the credit card bill, that's an example of a type 1 worry. It's a worry about a problem that's actually occurring. Now, the other type of worries are called type 2 worries. Now, type 2 worries are worries about future or potential problems. Problems that haven't happened yet, problems that may never happen. So, for example, I get my credit card bill in the mail, and the credit card bill is for $300. I have $320 in my bank account, so I can pay that credit card bill. But I start thinking to myself, well, that was a close one. What if next month I'm not able to pay my credit card bill? And what if that has a negative effect on my credit rating. And what if that means I'm not going to be able to get a car loan, which means I'm not going to be able to get a good job because I can only get a job that I can commute to by walking or taking transit. And so I'm not going to be able to sort of have a very successful career, and no one will want to be with me. And because don't have a good job, and because I'm not able to afford a house, because I won't be able to get a mortgage, and then I'll get depressed because no one wants to be with me, and I'll lose my job, and I'll become homeless, and I'm living under a bridge. None of that stuff has actually happened, but I'm worrying about it happening. And that's that sort of chaining and that spiraling of thoughts that I talk about when I talked about earlier in terms of the definition of worry. So type 1 worries about actual current real problems. Type 2 worries are worries about future or potential problems. So you may be wondering, okay, so what? We've got this definition of worry and these two types of worries. What do I do with this? How does this help? Well, the key to understanding type 1 and type 2 worries isn't so much in terms of being able to define the worries, but when we talk about worry management tools, we're going to use slightly different tools depending on whether or not the worry is a type 1 worry or the worry is a type 2 worry. And so that's why it's important early on to get into the habit of being able to recognize your worries, think about your worries, and define the worries as either, is this a type 1 or is it a type 2? Now, sometimes worries can start out as type 1, and as part of that spiraling, they go into becoming type 2 worries. We call those mixed worries. So there's a component of it that's a type 1 and a component of it that's a type 2. So for now, the idea is to just spend some time thinking about your worry. And so this is what I encourage clients to do, is to use this information by just trying to be more aware and more mindful of your worries. And when you catch yourself worrying, to even just try and think about, is this a type 1 worry? Is this a type 2 worry? What that can do is it can help you disengage from the worry, even for a moment, and for you to start thinking a bit more analytically and a bit more critically about the worry. Rather than getting caught up in the worry experience, you're now kind of observing it and thinking about it differently. Even just by simply being able to say, this is a type 1 worry or this is a type 2 worry. Everybody experiences worry. So when I talk about worry management, I'm not really talking about a worry cure. What I'm talking about is helping people who worry a lot be able to better manage their worry so they're not worrying as much. Because the reality is everybody worries. It's just a matter of how much do people worry. So you can think of it kind of like falling on a continuum, where one end of the continuum are people who don't really worry very much at all. They still worry, but just not that much, and it's not particularly problematic or interfering for them. Then on the other end of the continuum are people who worry a lot. And if a person worries excessively enough, and if their worry is chronic enough, they can meet criteria for what we call generalized anxiety disorder. But regardless of whether or not a person meets criteria for generalized anxiety disorder, or they are a person who worries excessively, or they're a person who worries a little bit, the same worry management skills that I'm going to be talking about apply to all different types of worry and all different intensities of worry. The worry experience for people usually starts with a trigger. Some sort of trigger situation leads them to begin worrying. Now, triggers can be pretty much anything. So triggers can be internal. They can be thoughts that I have, thinking about an argument that I had with my wife. They can be physical sensations. I wake up in the morning, I've got a really bad headache. Triggers can be external. My cell phone rings. I check the call display and it's work calling. And I think to myself, well, why is work calling? What's going on? Is something wrong? So pretty much anything can act as a trigger. And the trigger then leads to what I call the what if question. Now, the what if question is kind of the foundation of worry. Now, the thing about worry is it usually doesn't just start and stop at one what if question. So, for example, the trigger is I wake up in the morning and I've got a bad headache, and I think to myself, what if this is a brain tumor? What usually happens is that worry either loops itself over and over and over again. So I worry and I keep thinking to myself about what if I have a brain tumor? What's going on? What if I have a brain tumor? Or it leads to a chaining or spiraling of additional what if thoughts that ends up in this negative scenario building of what might happen. And it's that chaining and spiraling of what if thoughts that's what we call worry. And so when a person is worrying, think about how that makes you feel, for example. So when you're worrying, what's the emotion that you associate with the worry? That emotion is typically anxiety. So this is an important point to note that worry and anxiety are not the same thing. So worry is this collection of what if thoughts. Anxiety is the emotion that results from the collection of these what if thoughts. So now think about this process and imagine if you worried a lot and you're going through this process day after day after day. Trigger what if worry anxiety, trigger what if worry anxiety, trigger what if worry anxiety. How are you feeling by the end of the day? Now, most of the time when I ask my clients that, they'll usually say two things. One, they feel exhausted. Now, exhausted on multiple levels. Exhausted mentally because their mind will not shut off, right? They just keep worrying. They just keep thinking. Their mind will not stop thinking about something. And so mentally that can be exhausting. But it can also be physically exhausting as well. So you're going through all of these negative thoughts in your mind, and it's normal for sort of the muscles to tense up and to just feel an increased physical tension. It can lead to problems with sleep because it's difficult to sleep when you're worrying so much. And so it's common for people to feel kind of exhausted and worn out by their worries, both mentally and physically. And the second outcome of this sort of constant worry process is a feeling or a perception of being demoralized, demoralization. And what I mean by that is that it's hard to really look forward to anything when you worry a lot. So it's hard to get really excited or enthused about something because when you think about all the positive things that can happen, what also happens is that you then begin to start thinking about all the negative things that could happen. So it's hard to really look forward to anything because you're always thinking about all of the negative things that can occur. And so the outcome of this worry process is a feeling of being demoralized and exhausted. And think about it. The more demoralized and exhausted you feel, what do you think that's going to do to the frequency of what if thoughts? It's going to increase them. And so you get into this self-feeding cycle of worry where you have a trigger leading to the what if, worry, anxiety, feeling demoralized and exhausted, which just means you're prone to creating more what if questions in response to triggers. So that's kind of the basic engine of worry. This is kind of how worry works. And as I go along with this video series and talk about other factors that contribute to worry, we're going to be building on this model. But it's important to understand this as kind of the core engine of worry. So with that understanding in mind, it leads to the first key worry management skill that I'm going to be talking about. Now, this is a foundational skill. It's hard to do any of the other worry management skills I'm going to be talking about if you don't do this skill. And the first worry management skill is worry awareness training. Essentially becoming more aware of what it is that you worry about and having a better understanding of your worry experience. Now, when I'm working with my clients and I bring this up, a lot of times people will say, hey, I already know what it is that I'm worrying about. I don't need to get better at thinking about my worries. But what I find for a lot of my clients is that they kind of know what the big worries are, but they don't really have a great sense of their entire worry experience. And for a lot of my clients, they are such highly efficient worriers that they're not even aware of everything that they're worrying about. That they worry almost automatically to a point that they're not even aware, or they don't even know what it is that they worry. And so it's not uncommon for people who come to see me to say, I don't really feel like I'm worrying, but I have a lot of free-floating anxiety. Now, usually when I hear the term free-floating anxiety, it's a cue for me that this is probably someone who is a highly efficient worrier, and that they're worrying but just don't realize it yet. And that's where worry awareness training comes in. So worry awareness training, really what it is at its core is excavating your worries, dusting them off, and really beginning to examine them so that you can have a new understanding and a better understanding of what your worry experience is actually like. Getting a better understanding of that worry fingerprint, your unique worry experience that's unique to you. So, how do you do worry awareness training? Key tool I use with my clients is called a worry diary. And what I'm going to be doing is putting a link to a worry diary that you can download in the description of the video below. So please feel free to download that and take a look at it. So the idea of a worry diary is that you don't keep track of every single worry that you have. Rather, what you're doing is you're taking a sampling of your worries. So what I get my clients to do is to complete a worry diary 3 times a day for 1 to 2 weeks. And the idea is to have some set times every day that you're going to pull out your worry diary and write down what it is that you're worrying about at that time. So I encourage people to set an alarm. So an alarm in the morning, in the afternoon, and sometime in the evening. When the alarm goes off, you pull out the worry diary and you complete an entry in the worry diary. So with the worry diary, the first column is the time and day. So the date, time that you're completing the worry diary. The next column is the situation. What's going on? What's the context that you're worrying in? This can map on to the trigger that we talked about before. After that, you write down what is it that you're worrying about? What are the what if thoughts that you're having in that moment? After you've completed the what ifs and written down what you're worrying about, you make a rating of your anxiety on a scale from 0 to 10, where 0 is no anxiety at all, 10 is extreme anxiety. So you make a numerical rating of how anxious am I in this moment. And then the last column of the worry relates to what I talked about in a previous video when I talked about a definition of worry and types of worry. And that relates to, is this a type 1 worry or is this a type 2 worry? Now, type 1 worries are worries about actual current problems. Type 2 worries are worries about future or potential problems. And so you take a look at what it is that you're worrying about and you make a rating. Is this type 1? Is this type 2? Now, sometimes a worry can be a bit of a mix of both. So it starts out as a type 1 worry and it spirals into a type 2 worry. If that's the case, you can write down both. So you complete this worry diary, and if you do this worry diary for a week or two, what it's going to give you is a rich amount of data about your worry experience that you may have never had before. Are there days or times that you tend to worry more than other days and times? Are there certain situations or triggers that tend to trigger your worry more? Are there certain worries that come up over and over and over again, kind of like your greatest hits of worry? Are there certain worries that are associated with higher levels of anxiety? So, for example, it's not uncommon for people to be well aware of the worries that are causing them levels 8, 9, and 10 in terms of anxiety. But when they do the worry diary, they realize, wow, there's a whole bunch of worries that are causing me anxiety about 3 and 4 that I was never actually aware of. And those worries can contribute to just that background hum of anxiety and nervousness. And those may be worries that a person's never thought about before. This worry diary can also help you get a sense of, are my worries more type 1 worries? Do I have more type 2 worries? Do I have kind of an equal mix of type 1 and type 2 worries? This is all information that people typically don't have about their worry experience. And by getting this information, it provides you with a lot of background that you're going to be able to use then when we start talking about other worry management skills. But none of the other worry management skills I'm going to be talking about are effective if you don't know what it is that you're worrying about. And that's the key, and that's the foundational skill of worry awareness training. And in the last video, I talked about a model for understanding worry. And I talked about it as the bare bones engine of worry, the driving force behind worry. So if you think of that as the engine of worry, what we're talking about today, intolerance of uncertainty, that's the fuel that drives this worry engine. So what is intolerance of uncertainty? Well, intolerance of uncertainty, one way to think about it is it's kind of like a psychological allergy. And if you think about how an allergy works, suppose I'm allergic to dust and I walk into a room, all it's going to take is for there to be just a little bit of dust in that room, and it's going to cause a big allergic reaction on my part. Sneezy, watery eyes, that sort of thing. Whereas somebody else who's not allergic to dust walks into the exact same room, has no reaction at all. So for people who are intolerant of uncertainty, all it takes is for there to be just a little bit of uncertainty in a situation, and it leads to a big emotional reaction, a big emotional response. So you can think of intolerance of uncertainty kind of like falling on a continuum, where on one end of the continuum are people who are highly tolerant of uncertainty. These are the people who, for example, can travel to Europe with a one-way ticket and a quarter in their pocket. They have no idea what they're going to be doing for work, what they're going to do for money, how long they're going to be gone, where they're going to go, but they just see it as a big adventure. They'll figure it out as they go. Whereas on the other end of the continuum, if a person is highly intolerant of uncertainty and they're traveling to Europe, they're going to have a clearly laid out itinerary. They're going to know exactly what they're doing on every day. They're going to have backup plans for if the weather changes. They're going to know exactly how they're going to get from point A to point B. Everything is going to be highly organized. Those people are highly intolerant of uncertainty. Now, what we know is that for people who worry a lot, they tend to gravitate more towards the highly intolerant end of this tolerating uncertainty spectrum. So the way intolerance of uncertainty works is it's kind of like a lens through which a person views the world. So you have this person and they're faced with an uncertain situation. And they're looking at this uncertain situation through this intolerance of uncertainty lens. What the intolerance of uncertainty lens is going to do is it's going to bend the person's perception or prediction of what's going to happen to be a negative outcome. So they're going to think about all of the possible negative things that can occur when faced with that uncertain situation. But you can probably also recognize on a logical level that uncertain situations don't always lead to negative outcomes. That there can be a range of potential outcomes that uncertain situations can result in. So some are negative, But some uncertain situations can turn out neutral, or they're neither good nor bad. They just kind of are what they are. And then there are some uncertain situations that turn out really positively. So they turn out much better than a person anticipated the situation was going to turn out. I call these happy accidents. Not expecting them to happen, they happen, and they're really great. So uncertain outcomes can fall anywhere on this continuum of possible outcomes. But the intolerance of uncertainty lens prevents a person from really considering the possible positive or neutral outcomes. And all the person ever focuses on is the potential negative outcomes. So it's not so much the uncertainty that is so sort of scary or anxiety provoking for a person who's intolerant of uncertainty. It's not the uncertainty itself, it's what they feel that uncertainty represents, which is the negative outcome, the negative potential outcome that they focus on, that this intolerance of uncertainty lens bends their predictions and their perceptions to be all about. So, what do you do with this information? How exactly does this work? And how can you use it to better manage worry? Well, think about the dilemma that someone who is intolerant of uncertainty experiences. On one hand, I'm intolerant of uncertainty. Yet on the other hand, there's uncertainty in the world around me. And so I have to try to find some way of reconciling these two things, the inherent uncertainty of the world and my intolerance of uncertainty. And invariably what people do is they tend to focus on ways of trying to eliminate uncertainty in their world, trying to control their world, trying to be highly organized, try to seek lots of information, avoid things that they are uncertain about. It's all designed to try and eliminate uncertainty in the world. But how effective do you think that is? Do you think there is any way to fully eliminate uncertainty in the world? Well, the answer is no. If you think back to the original model of worry that I talked about, it starts with a trigger. And what I mentioned and what I pointed out is that anything can be a trigger. So anything can trigger worry. Anything can trigger uncertainty. Any situation can have uncertainty associated with it. So trying to eliminate uncertainty in the world as a way of trying to manage this intolerance of uncertainty is kind of like a losing battle. It's sort of like I'm at the bottom of a pit and I want to get out of the pit. And the approach I use to try and get out of the pit is to pick up a shovel and to start digging. Now I'm doing lots of work. I'm putting lots of effort and energy into trying to get out of the pit. But is picking up a shovel and digging actually getting me out of the pit? No, it's just a lot of work that's not actually getting me anywhere. And that's what I find for a lot of my clients who deal with excessive worry and struggle with excessive worry. They feel exhausted because everything they've tried to do to manage their worry hasn't really helped. All of the ways that they try and control their world, all of the ways that they try and gather information, all of the ways that they try to avoid or eliminate the uncertainty in their world isn't really helping. It's like I've got a bucket and I'm trying to fill that bucket with water, but the bucket's got a big hole in the bottom of it. So I'm constantly pouring water into the bucket, but the bucket's never getting full. I will never be able to fully eliminate uncertainty in the world. So the only way of dealing with this dilemma, the world has uncertainty in it, and I'm intolerant of uncertainty. The only way of really reconciling this dilemma isn't to focus on eliminating uncertainty from the world. It's to focus on becoming more tolerant of uncertainty. It's not enough to just know you need to be more tolerant of uncertainty. The idea is you need to behave as if you're more tolerant of uncertainty. Most everybody knows at a logical level that uncertainty can lead to a variety of outcomes. They can lead to positive outcomes, they can lead to neutral outcomes, they can lead to negative outcomes. That's not an epiphany to people. So trying to convince yourself that uncertainty is going to be okay just based on logic probably isn't going to be enough to help you become more tolerant of uncertainty. So the key is to start to behave as if you're more tolerant of uncertainty, to do exposure to uncertainty and see what happens. And that's how we build tolerance for uncertainty, by essentially having experiences with uncertainty and seeing whether or not what I'm worrying about actually happens. But before we can get into that, you need to know the various different ways that intolerance of uncertainty is actually manifesting itself in your life, in your behavior, in the various things that you do. And that's what I'm going to be focusing on today. What are the various manifestations of intolerance of uncertainty? The various ways that intolerance of uncertainty kind of sneaks up on me, sneaks into my life, sneaks into my behavior, and is maintaining my worry even if I'm not aware that that's what's going on. So the first three manifestations of intolerance of uncertainty that I'm going to be talking about are essentially variants of the same thing. Avoiding doing certain things, finding imaginary obstacles or reasons not to do certain things, and procrastinating. The idea of avoidance, finding imaginary obstacles, and procrastinating, the idea behind this is that it gives me a temporary state of certainty. So for example, if a friend of mine called me up a few weeks ago and I haven't returned that phone call, and now I'm worrying about whether or not my friend's going to be upset with me for not having returned the phone call. As long as I'm not making the phone call, if I avoid making the phone call to my friend, I have certainty that in this moment, my friend isn't yelling at me. My friend isn't upset with me. My friend isn't telling me how disappointed they are in me that I didn't return the phone call. So it gives me this temporary state of certainty that the bad thing that I'm afraid of isn't actually happening. And that goes for finding those imaginary obstacles or reasons not to do certain things. I can come up with all sorts of explanations and rationale as to why I'm not going to return that phone call to my friend today. I can just put it off and say I'll do it tomorrow. They're all forms of avoidance. They're all forms of things I do to give myself a temporary state of certainty that what I'm afraid of isn't happening right now. The next manifestation of intolerance of uncertainty is having to do everything yourself, not delegating tasks to anybody else. The way this works is that if I do everything myself, I know it's been done right. I know it's been done the way I think it should be done. I know it's been done to my standards, to my expectations. The moment I have to bring somebody else in, or if I have to rely on somebody else to do it, well, now that brings up a whole bunch of uncertainty. What if they don't do it? What if they don't do it as well as I would have done it? What if they mess it up and it becomes a big mess and they really screw it up and then I have to go in and fix it anyway? You know what? It's just a lot easier if I do it myself. So this idea of not delegating tasks, needing to be in control, that's another manifestation of intolerance of uncertainty. Another manifestation of intolerance of uncertainty is not fully committing yourself to a relationship, a job, a project. The idea behind this is that if I fully commit myself to something, if I fully give it 100%, and the thing doesn't work out, then I'll be devastated. I'll be really upset. I will have fully invested in it and it doesn't work out. And so it's almost like I'm hedging my bets, kind of having one foot in, one foot out, not fully committing to it. That way, if the negative thing happens, or if the relationship doesn't work out, or if the project doesn't work out, well, I wasn't fully committed to it anyway. It's not that big of a deal. So it's like I'm hedging my bets, anticipating that it's not going to work out. Now, this can be really tragic. I've seen this in a lot of clients, unfortunately, especially around the idea of relationships, where they don't fully commit to the relationship because they're not sure if the relationship's going to turn out. And so they're kind of in and out of the relationship and they can never fully commit and they're not sure if they can commit. And eventually the relationship falls apart because they were never able to fully give themselves over to the relationship. I also see this with students who don't fully commit to their studies. They don't fully put effort into doing their studies, into studying for the test, into doing the paper. That way, if they don't do well, the reason why they didn't do well is they didn't really fully commit themselves to it anyway. But if they were to fully commit themselves to it and they didn't do well, the only answer is that they're not good enough. So it's almost like by not fully committing themselves to the project, to the assignment, to the studying for the test, they're hedging their bets that if it doesn't turn out well, then that'll be okay because they didn't really commit to it anyway. It's almost like a built-in excuse for why it didn't go right. The next manifestation of intolerance of uncertainty is spreading yourself out really thin, right? Wanting to sort of participate in a whole bunch of different things, keeping yourself really busy, but never fully committing to any of those little things that you commit to, or that you're keeping yourself busy with. The idea behind this is that I don't want to miss out on any opportunities. So I don't want to say no to anything and then later find out that it would have been a great opportunity. So I want to keep all of my options open as long as possible. But I won't commit to any of them. I just like to keep the various options available. So it's like I'm spreading myself out really thin and keeping busy doing a whole bunch of different things, but never actually committing to any of them. Now, this can lead to feelings of exhaustion because I'm spreading myself out really thin all the time because I just don't want to say no to something and then regret it later. The next manifestation of intolerance of uncertainty that I want to talk about is looking for a lot of information before proceeding to do something. So, for example, if I'm going to buy a digital camera, I'm going to research the heck out of that digital camera. I'm going to read every review that has ever been written about that digital camera. I'm going to read every review about every other digital camera. I'm going to watch all the YouTube videos about all the features of the camera. It's almost like I'm constantly looking for that little holy grail piece of information that's going to give me certainty that this is the right decision to make. So it's this excessive information gathering to try and give me reassurance and to give me certainty that I'm making the right choice. Now think about how this affects things like efficiency or making decisions. It just takes so much longer to make a decision. It makes me highly efficient because I can't ever just make a decision. I have to think through it over and over and over and look up lots of information before I can commit to making a decision about which camera I'm going to buy. And then the next manifestation of intolerance of uncertainty is that once I've made a decision, I doubt myself and then I check whether or not I made the right decision. So once I've bought that camera, I finally made a decision and I bought a camera, I spend the next 6 months reading reviews about all of the new cameras that came out since the time I bought that camera. Almost like I'm trying to convince myself or to prove to myself that I made the right choice, that I should have, I should have bought the one that I bought rather than, waiting a little bit longer because a better camera came out. So it's always like I'm second guessing decisions that I've already made after I make them. The next manifestation of intolerance of uncertainty is seeking reassurance from other people. This is essentially a variant of the information gathering manifestation of intolerance of uncertainty. Except the way that you're gathering information with reassurance seeking is, rather than doing your own research, you're asking other people for reassurance. Hey, I was going to do this, this, and this. What do you think? Do you think I should be doing that? I was going to answer my friend in this way. What do you think? Do you think that's what I should do? What do you think I should do? This reassurance seeking is very insidious because what it does is it really undermines a person's confidence in their ability. If you were confident in what you were doing, why would you have to seek reassurance and have to seek someone else's input before you go ahead and do something? So the act of reassurance seeking actually undermines confidence. And that's why a lot of people who worry a lot lack confidence, is because they're really worried about making the wrong choices or making the wrong decisions or upsetting someone. And so they engage in this reassurance seeking to try and give them a sense of certainty that everything's going to be okay. But in doing so, it just undermines their confidence in their abilities. And that's really tragic, and it's really one of the ways that this intolerance of uncertainty chips away at a person and really contributes to their worry and their anxiety. The next manifestation of intolerance of uncertainty is one that when I bring it up with clients, they either relate to it or they don't relate to it at all. And the idea here is try and explain everything away rationally, or always trying to imagine everything's going to turn out well. So it's almost like creating a false sense of certainty. So rather than going into an uncertain situation and saying, look, I don't really know how it's going to turn out, let's see, this manifestation of intolerance of uncertainty is kind of like always thinking the bright side is going to happen and always telling yourself the bright side is going to happen. So it's not so much, I don't know what's going to happen, it's everything's going to be fine. No, everything's going to be fine. Just think positively, it's all going to be okay. Well, the thing is, I don't know it's all going to be okay. So by telling myself that, I kind of know that I'm sort of trying to pull the wool over my eyes. It doesn't really give me any sense of comfort because I know it's not true. I know that I can't know for certain that it's going to be okay. So this is one, like I said, this is one that sometimes people do, sometimes they don't, or they don't relate to. But it is surprising when people will sometimes look at this manifestation of intolerance of uncertainty and say, yeah, no, I don't do that. But once they start paying attention to their behavior, they realize, oh, wow, I actually do that. And I never realized that I was doing it. The next manifestation of intolerance of uncertainty that I wanted to talk about is double checking things or redoing them because I'm no longer certain that I did them right in the first place. So if I'm going to send an email, I double and triple check that email because I want to make sure there's no spelling errors in it. I want to make sure that everything's clear, or there's no way of misinterpreting what I'm saying, or I don't want to offend someone, so I want to make sure that the tone is right in that email. So I'll double and triple check it. I won't send it. I'll come back to it and read it over. Again, this kills efficiency because I can't just send an email. I have to read it over and read it over and read it over and try to be certain that there's nothing wrong with it. And the final manifestation of intolerance of uncertainty that I wanted to talk about today is overprotecting others, taking care of other people. This is a big one with parents. And this is kind of like a variant of that earlier one that I talked about, which is not delegating tasks. Except in this case, the tasks that aren't being delegated are allowing the other person, to take care of themselves. So, like I said, this is a big one for parents who are overprotective or are over-involved in their children's lives, in their children's behavior, in their children's relationships. So they're the ones that are trying to fix or coordinate any sort of arguments or little fights between their child and a friend, or they do everything for their child because they want to make sure that the child is okay, or that everything gets done right for the child. So what this does is it doesn't really allow the person who's being overprotected from doing things on their own, from learning from their own mistakes. So it's like trying to cocoon them in this protective bubble wrap, but it doesn't actually protect the person, because ultimately they're going to have to learn to do these things on their own. And so it really is about giving this person, giving me a false sense of security and certainty that this person that I care about is going to be okay. So that's a lot of manifestations of intolerance of uncertainty. And there's a lot of different ways that this intolerance of uncertainty can kind of weave its way into a person's life. And this is one of the reasons why I really like this concept of intolerance of uncertainty, because you can think of it kind of like an umbrella concept that helps explain why all of these various seemingly different behaviors are all serving, or all attempting to serve, the same purpose. So how is me avoiding returning a phone call to a friend the same as me spending hours and hours researching a digital camera? Well, because they're both designed to try and eliminate uncertainty in my world. And in doing so, they're both maintaining my worry and my anxiety that things are going to turn out badly, or things are going to turn out negatively. So may raise the question of, well, so what do I do with this information? So I see, I've learned about all these manifestations of intolerance of uncertainty. What now? So the idea is to spend some time observing your behavior and looking for personal examples in your life of the various ways in which intolerance of uncertainty may have manifested itself in terms of your behavior. Once you start looking for it, what you may recognize is that there's all sorts of ways in which you've been behaving that are designed to eliminate or reduce or avoid uncertainty in your life. And it's that avoidance of uncertainty, or that trying to eliminate uncertainty, that may be one of the big things that's perpetuating or maintaining your worry and your anxiety. So one of the things I often encourage people to do is, keep a list of these manifestations of intolerance of uncertainty, and spend a week or two paying attention to your behavior and seeing, which of these do I do, and what are personal examples of each of these things that I do. So the key to understanding building tolerance for uncertainty is to understand that when we talk about worries, we're talking about thoughts that are predictions of something that's going to happen. So the idea is to reconceptualize your worry, or think about your worries not so much as worries or factual things that are going to happen, but essentially predictions and hypotheses of what's going to happen. So the key way we build tolerance for uncertainty is through behavioral exposure to uncertainty, essentially doing what I call tolerating uncertainty experiments. So the idea with these tolerating uncertainty experiments is to put those predictions to the test and see how accurate those predictions actually are. So for example, if I'm avoiding returning a phone call to a friend because I'm concerned they might be upset with me, I might come up with a tolerating uncertainty experiment that gets me to call my friend. So that's the behavior. That's the tolerating uncertainty experiment behavior that I'm going to do. Return the phone call to my friend. The next thing to think about then is, what is it that I'm worrying about? What is my worry telling me is going to happen when I return the phone call to a friend? So the idea is you're setting up the experiment and you're thinking about the hypothesis or the prediction ahead of time. And so what I'll often give my clients is a worksheet to help them organize these tolerating uncertainty experiments in their mind. And I'll put a link to the worksheet down below so that you can download it and see it for yourself. So the first two parts of the worksheet you do before you actually engage in the experiment. Come up with the chosen behavior, and then you think about, what is it that I'm worrying is going to happen? What does my worry predict, or what is my worry telling me is going to happen? Now, this is where worry awareness training becomes really important. We talked about worry awareness training right at the beginning of this series on worry management. You need to know what it is that you're worrying about before you can actually begin to manage the worry. So the worry becomes central in this experiment. This is what we're testing. We're testing whether or not the worry, what we worry about, is actually going to happen. So now I've come up with my behavior. I've come up with my hypothesis, the worry prediction. Then I go and do the experiment. I actually pick up the phone and I call my friend. This is the data collection portion of the experiment. And I write down and I record what actually happened. I called my friend and they were really pleased to hear from me. They were surprised why I hadn't returned their call, and they had some really exciting news to tell me. And it turned out really well. Or I call my friend and they tell me that they've got some bad news. They just lost their job and they were calling me up to get some support or to get some advice as to what they should do. Or I call my friend and they are really angry with me. And they're really upset because I keep flaking out on them and I'm never available for them when they call. Whatever the outcome, I record it. And then I come up with my conclusion based on the outcome. Was my worry accurate? Was my worry prediction, did it actually come true? So if you think about this, if you do, say, 100 of these tolerating uncertainty experiments, and 95 of the 100 tolerating uncertainty experiments turn out negatively, so they turn out badly 95% of the time, what does that tell you about uncertainty? Well, what it tells you about uncertainty is that uncertainty is bad. That uncertainty is something to be afraid of. That most of the time, the vast majority of the time, when I'm uncertain about something, bad things will happen. And so what I should do is get better at avoiding uncertainty, get better at eliminating uncertainty in my life. If 95% of the time these tolerating uncertainty experiments turn out badly. But what if 95 of the 100 experiments that I do turn out either neutral or positively? What does that tell me about uncertainty? Well, what it tells me about uncertainty is 19 times out of 20, the uncertainty is just fine. nothing bad happens. And so how do you think that's going to change how I orient myself towards uncertainty? How do you think that's going to change how I think about and feel about uncertainty? Well, I'm probably not going to be as afraid of uncertainty if through 100 experiences with it, it's turned out just fine. So the idea here isn't to try and convince yourself through logic or just rational thinking that uncertainty is okay. The idea here is for you to determine how you should feel about uncertainty through experiences with uncertainty. And by setting up these tolerating uncertainty experiments, you're giving yourself explicit examples of times where you did something you were uncertain about, you were worrying that this was going to happen, and what you were worrying about didn't actually happen. And the more you the more you sort of see, and the more you observe, and the more you demonstrate to yourself that the things that you worry about don't actually happen, the less weight, the less importance, the less value you're going to put on your worries. It's kind of like if every time the weatherman said that it was going to rain, it was sunny. And every time the weatherman said it was going to be sunny, it rained. Essentially, the weatherman's terrible at predicting the weather. So the next time the weatherman says it's going to rain, you're not going to take your umbrella because you know it's going to be sunny. If your predictions are not very good, you're not going to put much weight or much value in those predictions. And that's all worry is. It is a prediction. So that's one way of building tolerance for uncertainty, actually setting up these tolerating uncertainty experiments using the worksheet that you can download and fill out. You fill out the first 2 sections before you do the experiment. What is the experiment and what is your prediction? Then you do it, you record the data, and you record your conclusion. So it's sort of forward-thinking, pre-planned, tolerating uncertainty experiment. The second way of building tolerance for uncertainty is taking advantage of naturally occurring opportunities in your life to do things that you're uncertain about. The reality is we're faced with uncertainty every day, multiple times a day. And the vast majority of the time that uncertainty is turning out fine, we're just not even really aware, we're not even processing that the uncertainty is turning out fine. So what I often encourage clients to do to try and take advantage of naturally occurring opportunities to be more tolerant of uncertainty is to imagine the following question tattooed to the frontal lobe of their brain. So essentially, they're filtering their world through this question. And the question is, if I were more tolerant of uncertainty, what would I do in this situation? If I were more tolerant of uncertainty, would I order the same thing I always order in this restaurant? Or would I order something different? If I were more tolerant of uncertainty, would I ask that person out for a date? Or would I stay in my seat and not say anything? If I were more tolerant for uncertainty, would I answer the call even though I don't recognize the number? Or would I let it go to voicemail? If I were more tolerant of uncertainty, would I speak up and express my opinion in this meeting at work? Or would I stay quiet and wait to see what everybody else says? You have countless opportunities to tolerate uncertainty on a daily basis. You just have to look for those opportunities and take advantage of those opportunities when they present themselves. If I were more tolerant of uncertainty, what would I do in this situation? You don't have to do all of the tolerating uncertainties things, but just be aware of it. Just keep that question in mind. Help that orient you towards uncertainty, to look for uncertainty in your day to day life. And every once in a while, do the uncertain thing and see what happens. Because what you do by doing these tolerating uncertainty experiments, either the ones that are pre-planned or the ones that are just taking advantage of naturally occurring opportunities that come up, you can think of what you're doing kind of like putting money in a tolerating uncertainty bank account. What you're doing is you're having conscious, explicit experiences with uncertainty where you think about what it is that you are concerned is going to happen and then compare it to what actually happens. And by being aware of that and seeing that the uncertainty doesn't turn out badly all the time, or rarely turns out badly, what you're doing is it's almost like you're making deposits in this tolerating uncertainty bank account each time you do one of these experiments. And so through these experiences with uncertainty, the more and more of these experiences that you have with uncertainty, where uncertainty turns out well or fine or not negative, that tolerating uncertainty bank account gets bigger and bigger. And so when you're faced with a bigger uncertainty in life, what you can do is you can draw from this bank account. You can think about and reflect on all of the various experiences you've had with uncertainty in your life where it turned out fine. And so if all of those uncertainties turned out fine, there's a good chance this big uncertainty that I'm concerned about is going to turn out fine as well. So those are the two main ways of building tolerance for uncertainty. Planning ahead and actually setting up experiments and taking advantage of the numerous opportunities you have in your day-to-day life to tolerate uncertainty. If I were more tolerant of uncertainty, what would I do in this situation? So today we're going to be talking about another factor that perpetuates excessive worry, and that relates to this notion of beliefs about the usefulness of worry. One of the things that we know about people who tend to worry a lot is that they tend to hold beliefs that the worry is actually serving some benefit for them. So when I first bring this up with a lot of my clients, what they tend to do is kind of look at me a little bit odd and say, hold on a second. I recognize that my worry is causing me a lot of problems. And now you're telling me that I have some underlying beliefs that worry is actually serving me some benefit, or that I think it's doing something good for me. So the way I like to sort of introduce this concept of beliefs about the usefulness of worry is to use an example. And the example is that I change the oil in my car every 5,000 kilometers. Because I believe that changing the oil in my car every 5,000 kilometers is good for the long-term maintenance of the vehicle. It helps with the efficiency, it helps with preventing costly repairs down the line, and it's just something that's good to do because it helps my car run well and problem-free. Now, suppose one day a friend of mine pulls me aside, and this friend knows everything there is to know about cars. And this friend says to me, hey, Rami, you know that whole oil change every 5,000 kilometers thing? It's a bit of a scam by the oil companies. All they're really trying to do is to get you to buy more oil. Nothing bad is happening to the engine oil. It's perfectly fine. You don't need to change it at all. Now, if I believed what my friend was telling me, how would that change my behavior? Would I continue to change the oil in my car every 5,000 kilometers? Well, probably not. Because the only reason I'm changing the oil in my car every 5,000 kilometers is because I believe that changing the oil in my car every 5,000 kilometers is serving me some benefit, some usefulness. The moment I stop seeing any usefulness or benefit to changing the oil every 5,000 kilometers, then I'm going to stop doing it. So now relating this to excessive worry, what we know is that for people who tend to worry a lot, they tend to hold beliefs that worry is actually serving some benefit, some usefulness for them. So the first belief is this notion that worry helps motivate me. The idea that when I'm worrying about something, it's activating me to go and do something about it. It's activating me to engage rather than just being really relaxed about it. And if I'm not worrying about it, I'm not really going to be all that motivated to do anything, to engage in an activity, to try and change the situation at all. So the notion here is that worry in and of itself acts as a motivator to be that sort of that spark under me, or that kick in the pants that I need to get going and do something. The second common belief about the usefulness of worry is that worry helps with problem solving. Now, the idea behind this is that if I'm worrying about a problem, it's keeping the problem in my mind. It's helping me think about the problem a lot. And by thinking about the problem a lot, what that's doing is it's helping me potentially come up with solutions or ways of addressing this problem that I may not otherwise have if I wasn't worrying about it as much. So the idea here is that the worry benefits me because it helps keep a problem in my mind and helps me figure out ways to solve that problem. The third common worry belief is it's got a bit of a superstitious flavor to it. And the idea here is that worry in and of itself can prevent bad things from happening. Another way of thinking about it is if I don't worry about something, then it's almost like I'm jinxing myself. It's almost like if I don't worry about this presentation that I'm going to give, then that will be the time and that will be the presentation that things go really badly. It's almost like the universe is giving me a smack on the backside for not worrying enough or not being concerned enough about this presentation. So the notion here is that worry in and of itself can prevent bad things from happening. Related to this, but just a little bit differently, is this notion that worry can protect me from future negative emotions. So if I'm worrying about something bad happening, it's almost like I'm emotionally preparing myself just in case that bad thing were to happen. So I won't be caught off guard. I won't be surprised. I won't be blindsided by the negative thing because I've been worrying about it and I've been thinking about it. So the notion here is that if the bad thing were to happen, well, I've already kind of pre-prepared myself for the negative thing, and I've prepared myself emotionally to deal with it, so I'm not caught off guard and I'm not surprised. And the final worry belief is this notion that worry represents a positive personality characteristic. Essentially, what kind of person would I be if I didn't worry about my children? What kind of person would I be if I didn't worry about my relationship? What kind of person would I be if I didn't worry about my performance at work? It's almost like worry acts as this measure of how much I care, how conscientious, how responsible I am. So by worrying, it demonstrates that I care about these things, that I'm responsible, that I'm conscientious. And so that's actually a really good thing. It demonstrates a really positive aspect or really positive aspects of my personality. So if you think about these 5 worry beliefs, if worry actually did serve to motivate me, help me solve problems, prevented bad things from happening, protected me from future negative emotions, and demonstrated a positive personality characteristic, well, then that would seem to be something that I should be doing. Of course, I should be worrying if it actually served all of these purposes. But as you can probably guess, worry doesn't actually do any of these 5 things. And I'll explain why it doesn't in the next video. But you may now raise the question of, okay, well, so what? What do I do with this information? You've told me about 5 worry beliefs that promote anxiety and promote worry. So what? What can I do with this information? Well, the first thing to do is to use these worry beliefs and notice them when you catch yourself worrying. The idea here is that for a lot of people, this concept of part of the reason why I worry excessively is because I think that the worry is doing something positive for me. This is a bit of a foreign concept. People often, when I work with my clients, they've never thought about any potential benefits that they may have perceived that worry is giving them. And so the first step is to just be aware of which of these worry beliefs actually play a role in my worry. Now, there may be some of these worry beliefs that you're sort of that we're talking about that right away you're saying, no, that doesn't apply to me. I don't believe that at all. It's not so much whether or not you believe the worry belief to be 100% true all the time, but it's more like you want to ask yourself the question, am I behaving as if I believe this worry belief to be true? And so for a week or two, spend some time paying attention to what it is that you're worrying about. And then when you notice what you're worrying about, ask yourself, are there any of these 5 worry beliefs that may be playing a role in this worry? Because once you're aware of the common worry beliefs that you tend to use, then you can begin working on challenging those worry beliefs and evaluating whether or not those worry beliefs are true. But you can't do that unless you're aware of what the worry beliefs actually are. But once you identify the worry beliefs, the question then becomes, okay, well, what do I do with that information? So if I know that I'm engaging in this worry in part because I hold this worry belief, how can I go about changing that? And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Ways of challenging the validity of these beliefs and assumptions about worry. So what we're going to do is go through each of the 5 worry beliefs and talk about different ways and different questions to ask yourself to help you challenge the validity of the worry belief. Because it's important not only to recognize that the worry belief isn't true or that the worry belief is a myth, but also to understand why it's not true. Because that results in a much more compelling challenge to the usefulness of the worry. So the first worry belief that we talked about is this notion that worry acts as a motivator. That worry is the kick in the pants that I need to get going, to engage in doing things. That if I didn't worry, I wouldn't be particularly motivated, I wouldn't be particularly successful. Here are some questions to think about how you'd go about challenging that belief. So if you believe that worry does actually motivate you, well, have you ever met anyone or ever known anyone who was really successful and was really able to motivate themselves who didn't seem to worry excessively? Well, if so, then what that means is that worry isn't a necessary component for success or motivation. Another question to ask yourself is, does worry dramatically improve your performance or your ability? If so, by what percentage? Does it make a big change? So when you're worrying a lot, do you find that you perform even better? Or do you find that sometimes when you're worrying a lot, it actually interferes with motivation? It actually causes problems that make you less motivated to engage in an activity or to do something. So think about how you feel when you're worrying excessively. What does that do to concentration? What does that do to energy level? So if you're worrying a lot and it's causing you to lose focus or lose concentration, how exactly does that help motivate you? If your worrying is so exhausting and wearing you out so much, how does that help you get things done if you don't have as much energy? When you're worrying a lot, what does that do to your tendency to want to engage in an activity? When we talked about intolerance of uncertainty, we talked about one of the manifestations of intolerance of uncertainty is procrastination. So if worrying is causing you to procrastinate a lot, how exactly can that be something that's consistent with something that helps motivate you? So these are some of the questions to ask yourself to challenge that belief that worry helps motivate me. So the next worry belief that we talked about is that worry helps with problem solving. It's this notion that by worrying a lot about the problem, it keeps the problem in my mind and it helps me come up with solutions for that problem. So if we want to look at whether or not this belief is true, you want to ask yourself the question, does worry actually solve the problem? Is worrying the same as problem solving? Well, worrying, as we talked about in an earlier video, is essentially looping a feared negative outcome over and over and over again in your head. It is something that you're doing cognitively. It's something that is just a bunch of thoughts spinning in your head. Whereas problem solving is a much more active behavioral task. You're defining problems, you're coming up with possible solutions, you're implementing solutions, you're doing something about it. So what you want to be clear on is, are you worrying or are you problem solving? And you don't want to be mixing up the two, because worrying isn't the same as problem solving. Worry doesn't have any effect on the world. Worry is something that you're doing in your head. It doesn't actually solve a problem. So being very careful to distinguish between worrying versus active problem solving. Another question to ask yourself, just like with the previous worry belief, is, do you know anyone who's really good at solving problems, who's able to get things done, who's able to figure out solutions to problems, who doesn't worry excessively? Well, if you're able to identify at least one person in your life who doesn't worry excessively but is still able to solve problems, what that suggests is maybe you don't need to worry excessively to be good at solving problems. And tying back to another question that we asked earlier, think about what worry does to your anxiety levels, and think about when you're feeling really anxious. What does that do to how well you're able to think clearly, how well you're able to concentrate, how well you're able to think creatively? Well, we know that worry and anxiety interfere in all of these things. So by worrying, what you're doing is you're making it more difficult to concentrate. You're making it more difficult to think clearly through situations. And you're making it more difficult to think more clearly or more creatively. So by worrying, what you're doing is actually interfering in the cognitive skills and the tools that you need for effective problem solving. So These are some questions to ask yourself if you believe and if you think that worry helps you solve your problems. Now, the third worry belief we talked about has a bit of a superstitious flavor to it. And it's this notion that worry can prevent bad things from happening. Just the act of worrying can help prevent me from being jinxed or can prevent the bad thing from occurring. Well, to challenge this belief, you want to ask yourself some questions based on experience. Have you ever worried about something bad happening and the bad thing actually did happen? Well, if worry were able to prevent bad things from happening, then every time you worried, the bad thing shouldn't happen. Think about potentially setting up an experiment. One thing I'll often get people who hold this worry belief to do is to go out and buy a lottery ticket. And then for 1 week, to spend 5 to 10 minutes every day worrying excessively, worrying as hard as they can about having wasted their money on that lottery ticket. Think about what should happen then. If worry can prevent bad things from happening, what should happen? Well, they should win the lottery, because by worrying about having wasted their money on the ticket, if worry can prevent the bad thing from taking place, can prevent the negative outcome, then the person shouldn't experience a negative outcome, which means that they should win the lottery. Not once in all my years of doing this has a client come back and said, hey, guess what? I won the lottery. So that's another way of challenging this notion that worry can, in and of itself, have some impact on the outcome. You also want to think about, is it the worry that's preventing the negative outcome, or is it things that you're doing that are preventing the negative outcome? So, for example, if I'm worrying about a presentation that I'm going to give, and that presentation turned out fine after I worried excessively, was it the worry that ensured that the presentation went well? Or was it the fact that I prepared really well for the presentation that ensured that the presentation went well? Is it maybe the fact that I kind of knew what I was talking about that ensured that the presentation went well? Maybe it has nothing to do with the worry. A fourth common worry belief is this notion that by worrying about something bad happening, it almost protects me from future negative emotions by preparing me emotionally just in case the bad thing were to happen. So if the bad thing were to take place, by worrying about it, what I've done is kind of prepared myself for that bad thing. So I'm not caught off guard, I'm not surprised. And in some ways then, that can help reduce the impact of the negative emotion. Well, have you ever worried about something bad happening and the bad thing actually happened? How did you feel afterwards? Did you say to yourself, yeah, I don't feel so bad because I've been worrying about it for the last 3 weeks? Probably not. Another way I get people to think about this is it's a bit abstract and it's a bit of a silly math puzzle, but I like it because it helps explain how to really get at this notion or really challenge this notion that worry prevents me from feeling bad in case something bad happens. So I want you to think about sort of negative emotion in terms of pieces of suck. How much it would suck if this thing happened. So suppose one of my big worries is that my family is going to be killed in a motor vehicle accident. And I worry about this a lot. Well, think about what that worry does in terms of how it makes me feel. Well, it's probably going to suck to be worrying about this all the time and to be thinking about this all the time. So maybe that's 100 pieces of suck. Now imagine Tragically, one day my family is killed in a motor vehicle accident. Say that is 1,000 pieces of suck. Well, do you think the moment I pick up the phone and hear the message that my family's been killed in a motor vehicle accident, do you think that moment when I hear that news that I'm going to be saying to myself, wow, it's a good thing that I've been worrying about this for so long. I don't feel so bad right now. No, it's going to suck. It's going to suck that 1,000 pieces of suck, whether or not I've been worrying about it or not. So if you do the math, I worry excessively about my family being killed in an accident. That's 100 pieces of suck. My family is killed in a motor vehicle accident. That adds 1,000 pieces of suck to the equation. So what am I left with? I'm left with 1,100 pieces of suck. Well, suppose I don't worry excessively about it. Well, I have 0 pieces of suck. And then if the bad thing were to actually happen, I have 1,000 pieces of suck. So the net result is I end up with 1,000 pieces of suck. It's still better than the 1,100 pieces of suck. Now suppose my family never gets killed in a motor vehicle accident. Well, I'm worrying about it happening, so that's 100 pieces of suck. It doesn't happen, that's 0 pieces of suck. I'm left with 100 pieces of suck. But if I don't worry about it, it's 0 pieces of suck. If it never happens, that's 0 pieces of suck. I end up with 0 pieces of suck. So it's a bit of a sort of a strange or silly math puzzle. But what I find is that for a lot of my clients, it really resonates with them. Just do the math. How many pieces of suck are you actually saving by worrying about this? Probably not any, and you're probably actually making the situation worse. So the final worry belief I want to talk about challenging is this notion that worry represents a positive personality characteristic. That by worrying excessively, it demonstrates a sense of caring, a sense of responsibility, a sense of conscientiousness. This is a big worry belief for parents, especially moms, who often tell me, what kind of person would I be what kind of mother would I be if I didn't worry about my children? And so I ask the question, well, what are some of the other characteristics that make you a good mother, aside from worrying? Can you think of any other characteristics that are important to be a good mother? Another way of thinking about it is, does the worry ever interfere in you being able to be your best? Does it ever interfere in terms of how well you're able to engage in relationships, how well you're able to be present in situations? Does the worry ever interfere in those things? Well, if so, then how can it be a positive personality characteristic? How can it be a positive personality characteristic if it interferes in your relationships? If none of your friends or people close to you think that your tendency to worry is a good thing? Do you know conscientious, responsible, caring, loving people who don't worry excessively? If so, then worry probably isn't necessary to be conscientious, to be caring, to be responsible. So these are the 5 worry beliefs, and these are some questions to help you challenge each of those worry beliefs. And so you might be thinking now, okay, well, so what? What can I do with this? How do I actually use this information to help me worry less? So the way you do it is through something we call cognitive therapy. And this is essentially thinking about your thinking. Now, this is a bit of a challenging task because we're not typically used to thinking about what we're thinking. And we're definitely not used to thinking about our thoughts about what we're thinking. And that's kind of what we're doing here. So you have to be aware of what your worry is. That's cognitive layer 1.
Then you have to be aware of your worry belief. That's cognitive layer 2. And now we're challenging the beliefs about the usefulness of worry. That's cognitive layer 3. So this is a bit of a challenging task if you're trying to do it all in your head. And so to help be better able to challenge these worry beliefs, I've come up with a series of questions to help you work through this. And I have a worksheet that I give my clients, and I'll be linking to it in the description down below so you can download and take a look at this. But it helps you organize your thoughts to help challenge the beliefs that you have about the usefulness of the worry. So the way it works is the first thing you need to do is identify what it is that you're worrying about. This again goes back to that foundational skill I talked about in the very first video, which is worry awareness training. Being aware of what it is that you're worrying about. So you identify your worry. Then the next question to ask yourself is, what are the beliefs about the usefulness of this worry that may be playing a role in this worry? Do I think this worry is helping motivate me? Do I think this worry is helping me solve problems? Do I think this worry shows that I'm a caring person? Do I think that this worry is going to prevent something bad from happening? Do I think this worry is going to protect me from negative emotions in case something bad does happen? So you identify which of the worry beliefs might be playing a role in this worry. The third question then to ask is, if I had to prove to myself that these beliefs may not be true, what are some of the things, what is some of the evidence that I would point out? So essentially, using some of those questions I talked about earlier and challenging each of these worry beliefs. So if I think that this worry about my child shows that I'm a caring parent, I may want to start asking myself some questions of, well, does my worry ever interfere with me being a good parent? Does my worry ever make it more difficult for me to be present in these situations and moments with my child? Well, if so, then how can that make me a good parent? So you're using some of those questions to help challenge the worry belief. And then the fourth question you want to ask yourself is, what's the benefit for me continuing to worry about this issue right now? And it's not uncommon for the answer to this question to be none. Once you identified the worry belief and you've challenged the validity of the worry belief, oftentimes it's easy for a person to see, well, there's no real benefit for me to continue worrying about it. And that takes us to the fifth question, which is, okay, if there's no benefit of continuing to worry about it, what are the costs associated with worrying about it? So when you're thinking about the costs associated with worry, what you want to think about is things like, how does this worry or your tendency to worry interfere with your productivity, your performance? How does it make you feel? What is the impact that it has on your relationships with other people? What are the negative impacts that worrying excessively about this topic are having on you and having on other people? Are there other people who seem to get similar results as you without the same costs associated with this worry? So really thinking about what are the negatives associated with the worry? What are the negative impacts that this worry is having on you? Because you want to think about that in the context of this equation that we're looking at, which is asking kind of the ultimate question of, should I continue to worry about this? Is there value in continuing to worry about this? So you've gone through these 5 questions. What's the worry? What's the benefits associated, the perceived benefits associated with this worry? What are some of the challenges to those perceived benefits? What is the potential benefit of continuing to worry about this? What is the cost of continuing to worry about this. And based on all of that information, you come up with a conclusion. A conclusion about, now that I've thought through all of these things, should I continue to worry about this topic? Is there value in continuing to worry about this topic? And what you end up with is a much more compelling challenge, to the purpose or the utility of that worry than what people typically do, which is just stop worrying about it. It's silly. You shouldn't be worrying about it. Well, this goes beyond that. It's not so dismissive of the worry. It's more about, I know I should stop worrying about it because of this, and this reason, and because of this, and this cost. So it's a much more compelling, more rounded challenge to the validity of this worry. So this is a challenging skill. It's challenging because, for the most part, we're not used to thinking about our thinking. So it takes a fair bit of practice. And so I hope if you're interested in trying this out or using some of these skills, please download that worksheet that's in the description section below and try it out. Don't worry if you're not getting it right off the bat. It is a challenging task, but with practice, what I find is that people get a lot better at identifying and challenging some of the benefits they perceive that they're getting from a worry. What we're going to be focusing on now is tools and skills specifically to address type 1 worries. So worries about actual problems. So it may not come as much of a surprise that the primary way we deal with type 1 worries is to solve the problem that's contributing to the worry. And so that leads us to a question about, why is it that people who worry a lot tend not to have very effective, or tend not to engage in very effective problem solving? So there was some studies that were done that looked at how is it that people who worry a lot, how good are their problem solving skills compared to people who don't worry a lot? And you might be surprised by the findings. And what they found was that there's actually no difference in the problem solving abilities of people who worry a lot versus people who don't worry a lot. But what is different is that people who tend to worry a lot tend not to use the problem solving skills that they have, whereas people who don't worry a lot tend to be able to use their problem solving skills more frequently and more effectively. So you can think of this kind of like, the way I like to think of it is it's kind of like a garage door, where it doesn't matter if you have the best problem solving skills in the world. You can have the Ferrari of problem solving skills, but if that garage door is down, doesn't matter if you have a Ferrari in the garage or if you have a tricycle in the garage, neither of those problem solving skills are going to be able to get out of the garage. And so this garage door is something that we refer to as negative problem orientation. It's a tendency to view problems in an overly negative way, seeing problems as threatening, as dangerous, viewing myself as not being very good at solving problems or addressing problems. And so if I don't think I'm very good at solving problems, if I don't think that I should be having problems, if I don't think that problems are good, or that every time I have a problem it means that there's something wrong, I'm not going to be all that motivated to actually want to engage or do something about a problem. And so if I'm not actually engaging in a problem, if I procrastinate or I avoid dealing with a problem, what tends to happen to the problem? Well, typically problems that you don't deal with don't go away by themselves. And they tend to fester and grow and mushroom until they become a crisis. And now it's a crisis that you have to deal with. And so you go into the situation, and now I'm dealing with a crisis situation, and I deal with that crisis situation by spontaneously coming up with the first thing that comes to mind to try and deal with this problem. That is not a very good recipe for effective problem solving. A crisis situation and me spontaneously coming up with a solution right off the top of my head to address this crisis situation. And so what ends up happening is I don't really address the problem very well, and then that reinforces my negative beliefs and my negative views about problems. That problems are bad, problems, I shouldn't have problems, and I'm terrible at dealing with problems. And so as long as I hold those views and I don't engage in problem solving, that's just going to maintain the problems, and it's just going to maintain my worry about those problems. So if we want to improve worry management skills, if we want to worry less about problems, we need to get better at solving problems. And in order to get better at solving problems, we have to be able to use the problem solving skills we have. And in order to use those problem solving skills, we need to address this negative problem orientation. We need to get the garage door to move up, and then to be able to let our problem solving skills out of the garage. So negative problem orientation tends to have sort of three components to it. And the first component of negative problem orientation is this tendency to see problems as abnormal, or that there's something wrong with me that I have problems, that other people don't seem to have the same problems that I do. Related to this is the idea that problems should be solved quickly and easily, and that if I'm not able to solve a problem really quickly, or if I'm not able to solve a problem the first time I try to solve the problem, then that means that there's something wrong. That I should be able to solve a problem quickly and easily, and if I can't, then that just goes to show that there's something wrong with this problem, or there's something wrong with me for having problems like this. So that's one sort of manifestation of this negative problem orientation. Second manifestation of this negative problem orientation is a tendency to focus entirely on the threat components of the problem. So when faced with a problem, all I think about is all the things that could go wrong. So if you think about the possible outcomes of a problem on a continuum, where one end of the continuum is opportunity or challenge, opportunities for things to work out, and the other end of the continuum are I see it as entirely threatening, 100% threat. Well, what we know is that with people with this negative problem orientation, with people who worry a lot, they tend to gravitate more towards focusing on the threat aspect of a problem. And so if all you think about when you think about solving a problem is all the things that could go wrong and how badly it can turn out, that's not particularly motivating, or it's not particularly good as a motivator to get me to do something about that problem. So I end up in this paralysis zone where all I'm really doing is focusing on the negative potential outcomes, and I'm paralyzed to do anything about it. So what ends up happening is I don't really engage in trying to solve the problem or trying to deal with the problem, because I don't really see many opportunities for things to work out well. And that leads to the third component of negative problem orientation, is that sometimes people can get so good at avoiding problems that they fail to recognize when a problem's actually there. They get so good at being avoidant to problems that they don't recognize that a problem exists until it's too late, until it becomes a crisis, like I talked about before. So if I'm not even aware, or if I'm not even recognizing that a problem's there, I'm not going to be able to engage in trying to solve the problem. So we have these three components of negative problem orientation. I see problems as abnormal, that there's something wrong with me for having problems. I focus entirely on the potential threat or danger associated with a problem, and I get so good at avoiding problems that I fail to even recognize when problems exist. If I have those three things going on, I'm not going to be particularly good at actually engaging or doing anything with regards to problem solving. So the question becomes, okay, well, what do I do with this? If I recognize that I have this negative problem orientation, I don't deal well with problems, what do I do? So let's talk about how you challenge each of these components of negative problem orientation. So uh, if you find that you tend to view problems as abnormal, or there's something wrong with me for that I have problems, or problems should be solved quickly and easily. First thing I typically ask my clients is, well, do you know anyone who doesn't have problems? Or is the presence of problems indicative of there's something being wrong? Or is it the case that just everybody has problems and that there's nothing really wrong with the fact that you actually have problems? Because having problems is just a natural state of being. Everybody has problems. So it's really about normalizing the occurrence of problems. Beautiful people in Hollywood have problems. People who are down and out have problems. Rich and powerful politicians have problems. Everybody's got problems. So the fact that you have a problem or the fact that you have problems doesn't necessarily mean that there's something wrong with you. It just means that you're like everybody else. We all have problems. And no one ever said that problems should be solved quickly and easily. I sort of think of it as kind of like the sitcom approach to viewing problems, where people hold this attitude that problems should be resolved just like they are on TV sitcoms, where a problem arises in the first 5 minutes of the show, there's then 20 minutes of zany hijinks, and then everything gets wrapped up nicely in the last 5 minutes, problem solved, everyone goes on with their life. While that works really well in TV sitcoms, no one ever said that real world or real life problems are actually like that. So if you're having problems that you find are challenging or difficult to overcome, well, welcome to the club. Everybody has those types of problems, and no one ever said that problems should be solved quickly or easily. So really challenging this component of negative problem orientation is really about normalizing the occurrence of problems and normalizing the fact that some problems are just really difficult to address. The second component of negative problem orientation, this tendency to focus on the threat component of the problem. Well, if you think about our continuum, and I'm stuck in the paralysis zone, where all I'm thinking about is all of the potential threat or danger that is associated with this problem, all of the things that could go wrong with this problem. Well, part of this has to do with intolerance of uncertainty, and we talked about that in a prior video. Intolerance of uncertainty goes very well and hand in hand with this fear of addressing problems or this viewing problems as threats. Because problems at their core, by definition, are things that we're uncertain about the solution to the problem. If we knew exactly what we needed to do to solve a particular problem, then it wouldn't be a problem. It would just be a series of steps that I need to engage in. What makes it a problem is the uncertainty and the unknown of what it is that I need to do to solve this problem or how I solve this problem. And so this intolerance of uncertainty can get a person to really focus on all of the potential threat or danger associated with potentially trying to address this problem. So the idea here is to try and reframe the problem as an opportunity and try and get it out of this paralysis zone where all you're focusing on is the potential threat. So it's just a reframe. Thinking about the problem in a bit of a different way. You don't have to see the problem as entirely good or it's going to be really wonderful to try and solve this problem. But you just need to get out of this paralysis zone. So you just need to reframe or shift the problem or shift your perception of the problem just a little bit to get out of that paralysis zone so that you can see a little bit of opportunity. And with that little bit of opportunity, now you might be more motivated to actually engage in this problem or in solving the problem. So how exactly do you do this? Well, let's think about an example. Suppose I have a job interview coming up. And one of my things is that I'm terrible at job interviews. I always get really nervous and anxious, hands get sweaty, and my voice tends to quake, and I tend to ramble, and all this sort of thing. And I'm really concerned about this job interview, and I see it as a real problem of how I'm going to go about dealing with this job interview. So one way of reframing this as an opportunity is to look at it and say, okay, yeah, I haven't had really good experiences at job interviews in the past, but the opportunity in this is for me to practice the skill of interviewing for a job. So even if I don't get this job, the opportunity here is that I get some practice engaging in a job interview, and in doing so, I'm going to potentially get better so that for my next job interview, I'll have some experiences that I can learn from and that will help me in the next job interview. So it's not sort of making it entirely Pollyanna, this job interview is going to turn out great, I really love job interviews. That's not realistic thinking. But it's more about just reframing it a little bit to get out of that paralysis zone and to look for even just a little bit of opportunity with this problem. If you're ever struggling to find an opportunity in a problem, a good default is always, this is an opportunity for me to tolerate uncertainty. Like I said, problems by definition are uncertain. And so if you're looking for an opportunity, the opportunity is, this gives me a chance to work on my tolerating uncertainty, which, if you've seen previous videos, you know that's a key to cutting off the worry fuel supply. So to help with this sort of challenging or reframing problems as opportunities, I have a worksheet that I'll link to in the description below. You can download the worksheet, and it sort of walks you through how to take a type 1 worry, a worry about an actual problem, and then to reframe it as an opportunity or a challenge. So the third component of this negative problem orientation, this tendency not to recognize or not to be aware of problems until it's too late. So there's a couple ways of addressing this. The first is these problems, or problems that a person doesn't deal with very well, they tend not to be one and done types of problems. These are problems that tend to come up again and again and again. They tend to recur for a person. So one way of becoming better at recognizing problems early on is to actually keep a list of what are problems that tend to recur for me again and again and again. Because by keeping this list, what it does is it keeps your mind, or it keeps you alert to potential problems that may come up that you wouldn't necessarily recognize unless you were looking for them. So for example, one of my recurring problems is that I'm always terrible at school projects that involve working in groups. And every time that's happened to me in the past, it's been a real mess where I have either difficulty trying to take control of the situation, or I just become incredibly passive in the situation, and it doesn't work out very well. So that's something that I can keep track of. That's a recurring problem that comes up again and again for me. So I just have it on my list of recurring problems, just as a way of keeping it in the forefront of my mind. Another way of being more aware or recognizing problems earlier on is to use your emotion as a bit of a red flag, a bit of a cue to stop and to look around and to ask yourself, is there a problem here that I'm not addressing? So you notice yourself feeling really anxious in a situation. That's a moment to stop and say, okay, I'm feeling really anxious. What's going on here? Is there a problem that I'm not dealing with? Is there a problem that I'm not addressing? I had a good example of this with a client a few years ago. And this client found that he was just really, really anxious whenever he was at work. And so we got to this part of the worry management program where we talked about negative problem orientation. And he used his anxiety at work as a cue. And he stopped and asked himself one day, okay, what's going on here? Why am I always so anxious at work? And as obvious as this may sound, as simple as this may sound, what he realized by sort of stopping and asking himself that question was that he hated his job. He hated everything about it. It was going nowhere. It wasn't really that reinforcing for him. He didn't like the people that he was working with. And so once he was able to recognize and identify that the problem was that he hated his job and that's why he was so anxious whenever he was at work, he was then able to engage in some problem solving. So what he did is he worked on his resume and he submitted his resume, he applied for a bunch of jobs, and he got a new job. And lo and behold, he was no longer anxious at work. So it was using his anxiety at work as that red flag of that caused him to stop and ask, is there something that's going on here that's making me anxious or that I'm worrying about? Is there a problem here that I'm not dealing with? And once he did, he was then able to take some steps and deal with the problem. So those are the manifestations of this negative problem orientation, and those are some tips to try and improve your orientation towards problems. Like I said, this is the garage door, and until you deal with negative problem orientation, as long as you tend to view problems in a really negative way as threats and that you avoid dealing with, you're not going to be able to deal with the problems, and you're probably going to continue worrying about the problems excessively. By addressing this negative problem orientation, by normalizing the occurrence of problems, by reframing problems as opportunity instead of threat, and by recognizing problems earlier on, what you're doing is you're raising that garage door and you're allowing yourself to use your problem solving skills that you already have and to use them in a really effective way.
So what we're going to be talking about is 6 steps in problem solving. And these 6 steps, like I said, it's kind of like a recipe. And if you follow the recipe, what you'll find is that you're a lot more effective, or it gives you a framework to be more effective in terms of solving problems. So the very first step in problem solving is one you probably already know and probably pretty obvious to you, is that you need to define the problem. And the way I like to think about defining the problem is to sort of ask yourself 3 questions. What is the situation that currently is? What would I like the situation to be? And what is the barrier or the obstacle between what is and what should be? Because then you can reframe the problem as a question about how you address or remove the barrier to get the situation to what you want it to be. So the first step is defining what your problem is. So let's use an example as we go along here. Suppose my problem is that I'm feeling like I'm overweight, that I need to lose some weight. And the barrier I've discovered is that I really just don't have a very healthy lifestyle. My lifestyle is one that it doesn't allow me to be particularly healthy with regards to diet, with regards to exercise. And so the problem is that my lifestyle is preventing me from being more healthy and helping me lose weight. So step 1, define the problem. Step 2 comes directly from step 1, and it's defining what the goal is. So I've defined the problem, but what is it that I want?
What is my goal? And to try to be as kind of specific and clear and behavioral as possible with regards to the goal. So in my example, the goal may be that I want to lose 15 pounds. So that's my goal. So that leads us to the third step, which is what I call the brainstorming step, coming up with alternative possible solutions to address this problem. Now, I find that with a lot of the clients I work with, this is the part of the problem solving that they tend to rush through. The idea with brainstorming is you want to try and generate possible solutions to help you address this problem. And those possible solutions need to meet sort of three principles for effective or good brainstorming. The first principle is what I call the quantity principle. And what that means is you want to generate a lot of possible solutions. What people often do when they're engaging in problem solving, they just come up with the first one or two ideas or solutions that come to mind, and that's what they go with. Brainstorming takes it beyond just those one or two possible solutions and gets you to think about lots of different possible solutions. So when you're thinking about brainstorming, I like to tell people, rough rule of thumb, 10 to 15 possible solutions to this problem. So that's the quantity principle. The second principle of effective brainstorming is the diversity or different types of possible solutions. So if, for example, I'm going through my brainstorming and I'm coming up with possible solutions like my possible solution is to go to the gym and run on the treadmill. Another possible solution is to go to the gym and ride the exercise bike. Another possible solution is to go to the gym and go on the elliptical trainer. Now, these are all different solutions, but they're all kind of the same solution. So you want some diversity in the possible solutions that you're coming up with. So it's not just the same thing over and over again. You want some variety in the possible solutions you're coming up with. So one of my possible solutions could be going to the gym and running on the treadmill. Or it could be eating more salad, or hiring a personal trainer, or taking up hiking, or going on a low-carb diet, or packing my own lunch for lunch rather than getting something at a restaurant. So I'm coming up with lots of different possible solutions to help solve the problem, or that could potentially solve the problem. The third principle of brainstorming is one that I find that people really struggle with. And this principle refers to deferring judgment. In other words, when you're brainstorming, you're not actually judging the possible solutions that you're coming up with. You're just coming up with the solutions. It's not about evaluating whether or not the solutions will work. The idea is you want to be as creative as possible with your solutions. You want to get out of the typical box that you usually think of when it comes to solving problems and think a little bit outside of that box. So when you're doing the brainstorming, some of the solutions you come up with should be a bit out there. They should be a bit ridiculous and bizarre. Because what that means is that you're allowing yourself to think outside how you typically think. I once had this experience with a client. This was a mom of 2 kids. She loved her kids dearly, but she just wasn't getting enough time away from the kids where she could do things to recharge her batteries. And so she tried all of the things like babysitting swaps with other moms or having her parents look after the kids, but she just wasn't getting a big enough chunk of time away from her kids. And so one of the things that she came up with as she was doing the brainstorming was putting her kids on a rocket and sending them to the moon. And so she thought, well, that's kind of a ridiculous idea. I could never do that. But it got her thinking, okay, well, I can't send my kids to the moon, but I can send them to summer camp. And so she got the idea to register them for a summer camp, and they went away to a sleepover camp. She had a week away from them, really recharged her batteries, and she felt really great because it had helped solve the problem of having some time away from her kids where she could really charge her batteries. And so she wouldn't have got there if she hadn't allowed her mind to go into kind of really out there possible solutions like sending the kids to the moon. So you want to defer your judgment, allow yourself to be creative, allow yourself to be a bit out there with the possible solutions. It's not about judging the solutions at this point. So after brainstorming, then you want to evaluate the possible solutions. This is where you determine whether or not those solutions could potentially work. So in order to evaluate the solutions, I like to get people to think of a few questions. So first of all, will this possible solution likely solve my problem? So for example, if one of the solutions I came up with while I was doing my brainstorming to help me lose weight is to go and do an all donut diet. Well, it's kind of an out there solution, but it's probably not going to solve my problem. It's probably not going to help me lose that 15 pounds. So right there, I can dismiss that solution as one that's probably not going to be all that effective. Another question I want to ask is how much time and effort is going to be involved in this solution? So if I come up with a solution of going to the gym 7 days a week and working out 8 hours a day, well, chances are that's going to help me get into really good shape. But it's not really all that realistic. And it's probably way more time and way more effort than I'm willing to do. So I'm unlikely to do that solution. I'm going to want to think about what will be the impact on myself? How will I feel about myself for coming up with the solution or implementing the solution? And what will be the impact on other people if I implement this solution? So for example, if one of the potential solutions I came up with is to steal my best friend's girlfriend, who happens to be a personal trainer, so I can get free personal training lessons, well, that might help me get into better shape because she'll give me free personal training lessons. But I'm probably not going to feel very good about myself for having done that. And my friend probably isn't going to be too pleased with me for having done that either. So that's not a very good solution either. So you have this list of possible solutions that you've brainstormed. So the idea is to try and evaluate these solutions based on these questions and to try to come up with the best possible solution, not the perfect solution. There likely will be no perfect solution. And so it's at this stage where you have to really tolerate some uncertainty because you're not going to know exactly what the best solution is. You're just going to have to pick one that seems like it's the best solution and go with it, tolerating the uncertainty of that. So once you've decided on a solution, the fifth step is to actually come up with a plan and implement the solution. So if I come up with, if one of my solutions is to eat more salad, I need to come up with a plan for how I'm going to actually implement the solution of eating more salad. So I'm going to make sure to add salad to my grocery list. I'm going to make an effort to buy the salad mix, so salad dressing, all of the fixings for the salad. And I may pick a day of the week. Maybe Tuesday or Thursday will be my salad days. And so I'll make a plan to implement eating more salad on those days. So I come up with a plan and then I implement the plan. And then the final step, step 6, is one that people often don't think about, but it's actually pretty critical in terms of problem solving. And step 6 is to verify whether or not the solution has worked. So to have sort of a set date or a set time that you're going to look back and say, okay, I've been doing the solution, I've been implementing my plan. Has it helped? So maybe I give myself a month of eating salad every Tuesday and Thursday. And so what I do is I weigh myself at the end of the month and see whether or not it's worked. If it has worked, that's great. I can reward myself, give myself a pat on the back for coming up with a solution and implementing it and it working. So I can feel good about myself for having taken some steps to solve this problem. But if it hasn't worked, if in the solution verification stage, I realize I actually haven't lost any weight, I've actually gained a few pounds, then this is an opportunity for me to look back on my problem solving approach and to ask myself, where might things have gone wrong? Well, maybe I didn't define the problem correctly. Maybe when I look back on my brainstorming, I only came up with one or two solutions. I didn't actually do the brainstorming that well. Maybe when it comes to evaluating the possible solutions, I look back on it and realize, you know what, the one that I picked seemed like it was going to work, but it didn't. Maybe I should try one of the other possible solutions that I came up with. Or I could look at it and say, hey, you know what, maybe the solution that I picked would have worked if I'd actually done it. And so looking back on it, I realized I didn't actually do a very good job of implementing the solution that I came up with. So the idea of the solution verification step is to help you to look back and figure out where it went wrong, if it did go wrong, and then to problem solve, or then to try different approaches or different tweaks to your solution to try to get at a solution that works. So the process is self-correcting if you allow it to be self-correcting and if you allow yourself the opportunity to reflect on whether or not it's working. So those are 6 steps to a recipe of 6 steps to help you solve problems more efficiently. So you might be wondering, okay, well, that's all great and interesting and all, but how does that help me worry less? Well, the idea is, with these type 1 worries, if you're able to more effectively solve the problem that you're worrying about, then you're not going to be worrying about it anymore. Understanding these problem-solving steps can also help you recognize what problem-solving is versus what it isn't, right? So when we talked about worry beliefs, one of the common worry beliefs is that worry helps me solve problems. Well, by understanding what problem-solving looks like, defining the problem, defining a goal, brainstorming, evaluating possible solutions, implementing a plan, and then verifying whether or not the plan worked, that's much different than worrying about negative things happening from this problem. So understanding these steps to problem solving also helps you understand a little bit better what problem solving looks like, what effective, active problem solving looks like, versus worrying about a problem. Now, obviously, these problem-solving steps that I'm talking about aren't going to be applicable to every problem. Now, there are some problems that are just pretty simple to solve, right? So if I take my lunch to work every day, and one day I forgot my lunch at home, well, I'm not necessarily going to have to go through these 6 steps of problem solving to figure out what it is that I need to do. I'll just go down to the food court and buy myself lunch. But these problem-solving steps can be really helpful for some of those more difficult problems. Some of those problems that you find that you're struggling with or that you've been struggling with for a while. And so if you can break down the problems and use this problem-solving recipe, it might be able to help you get to a more effective solution to the problem. And to assist with that, I'm going to link to a problem-solving worksheet down in the description below, so you can download that worksheet, and it can help you walk through these 6 steps of problem solving, just as a way of writing down how you're going to approach the problem. Type 2 worries are worries about future
or potential problems. Problems that haven't happened, problems that may never happen, but still a person worries about them. Now, the thing about these type 2 worries is that they tend to tap into the core fears that a person often has. So these type 2 worries tend to be about the most scary things that we fear or that we dread happening. Worries about failure academically, failure in life more generally, worries about losing a job or a relationship breakup, worries about you or someone you care about becoming very sick, or a family member dying in a motor vehicle accident. These types of things. So these type 2 worries tend to be quite scary and quite upsetting when they come up. So if you think about it, if you catch yourself worrying about one of these really sort of scary core fears, what's the most natural thing, the most natural reaction to do with those worries? Well, for a lot of people who worry a lot, and for a lot of people who don't worry a lot, the most natural thing when these unpleasant worries, these unpleasant thoughts about future negative events come up, the most natural thing to do is to try and push those thoughts out of your mind. Try not to think about them. And it makes sense. If these thoughts bring up sort of images or thoughts about things that are really distressing or really upsetting to think about, it's natural to just want to avoid thinking about that in general. It's something we call cognitive avoidance. So pushing these thoughts, suppressing these thoughts from my mind so that I don't have to think about the thing that's so upsetting that obviously I don't want to think about. Now, this cognitive avoidance may make sense on the surface, and it's kind of the most natural response to these upsetting thoughts. But one experiment, one little exercise I do with my clients to sort of explain how this cognitive avoidance works is to get them to, for 1 minute, to think about anything they want to think about. Anything at all. But in that 1 minute, I get them to try really hard not to think about a pink elephant. So they can think about anything they want to think about, just not a pink elephant. And so I start a timer and I get them to think about whatever they want, just not the pink elephant. But if they happen to think about a pink elephant, I ask them to make a mark on a piece of paper each time the thought or image of a pink elephant comes to mind. And usually what happens is in that 1 minute, I see them really start to struggle. Either they start to kind of laugh or they start to roll their eyes but they're making marks on that sheet of paper. And what ends up happening at the end of that minute is they've thought about the pink elephant a lot. And so I often ask them a few follow-up questions, like, how many times in the past week have you thought about a pink elephant? And usually the answer to this question is, well, I haven't thought about a pink elephant at all. And then I ask them, okay, well, in the past week, how much effort did you put into trying not to think about a pink elephant? And they tell me, well, I wasn't trying not to think about a pink elephant at all. And so I point out, well, isn't it interesting that in 1 week of putting no effort into trying not to think about a pink elephant, you didn't think about a pink elephant at all. But in 1 minute of trying not to think about a pink elephant, you thought about a pink elephant multiple times. We call this the paradox of thought suppression. The more you try not to think about something, the more you end up thinking about it. So, relating this to type 2 worries, if I'm avoiding thinking about these type 2 worries because they're really upsetting to think about and I don't want to think about them, and so if I'm trying to deal with these type 2 worries by pushing the worries
and by pushing the thoughts out of my mind. It's essentially me doing a pink elephant with these worries. I'm trying not to think about it. And by trying not to think about it, all that really does is it causes the worry to come up over and over and over and over again. And each time it comes up, I try and push it out of my mind, which means it's just going to come up again. And then I'm going to push it out of my mind and it's going to come up again. So the reason why these type 2 worries keep coming up is often because a person's trying not to think about it. And the harder you try not to think about it, the more the worry is going to keep coming up. So it's this really kind of self-destructive, self-fueling cycle. I liken it to trying to hold a beach ball underwater. The more pressure you put to hold that beach ball underwater, the more pressure there is for the beach ball to keep popping up. And then you grab it and you push it back down again, and it pops up, and you grab it and you push it back down again. But it just keeps coming up. And so while this cognitive avoidance on the surface seems like the most natural thing to do when these type 2 worries come up, it's actually one of the factors that's maintaining the type 2 worries. So that leaves us with the question, okay, if trying not to think about the type 2 worries is what's causing the type 2 worries to come up over and over and over again, what can I do about it? Well, the answer to that question is something we call cognitive exposure, and I'll be talking about that in the next video. If trying not to think about the type 2 worry is what's causing the worry to come up over and over and over again, the solution, the tip or the tool for managing these types of worries may seem very counterintuitive. And the idea is, rather than trying not to think about the worry, rather it's to think about the worry over and over and over and over and over again until you essentially drain the emotion out of the worry thought. So again, remember that worries they're just thoughts. They're predictions about the future. And with these type 2 worries, what can happen is you have this anxiety and this emotion connected with the worry and the worry thought. So every time the worry thought comes up, the anxiety comes up. And if you feel really anxious every time this thought comes up, it makes sense to want to try and get the thought out of your mind because the anxiety is really uncomfortable. So the way around this is by thinking about the worry again and again and again. The metaphor I like to use to explain this is to imagine that you're watching TV. And one day there's this weird satellite glitch that happens, and whatever it is that you're watching on TV disappears. And what ends up happening is this really grotesque, horrible horror film comes on the TV. And it's really upsetting, and it's really gross and distressing, and so you just turn off the TV. But the next time you turn on your TV, lo and behold, the same thing happens. The same movie interrupts what you're watching, and it gets really distressing for you, and you turn off the TV. You do it again, and it just keeps happening. Well, imagine what would happen and how you would feel if you allowed yourself to watch that horror movie all the way from the beginning to the end. Well, you'd probably find it really distressing. You'd probably find it really uncomfortable and really unpleasant. And you feel really distressed watching that movie. But then you force yourself to watch it a second time. Well, the second time you watch it, you may find it even more distressing and even more upsetting because you kind of know what to expect. And you kind of know the horrors that are awaiting. But then you force yourself to watch it a third time, and a fourth time, and a fifth time, and a sixth time. By the 100th time you've watched the horror movie, by the 1,000th time you've watched the horror movie, what do you think is going to happen to your emotional reaction to it? Well, you're probably going to be pretty bored. You're probably going to be like, oh yeah, guy jumps out of a shower with a big knife. Big deal. The movie hasn't changed one bit. What's changed is your emotional reaction to the movie. Essentially, it's drained any emotion out of the movie. And so it's no longer all that distressing. And so you're watching the same movie. It's the exact same movie that you saw the first time you saw it when it was really upsetting for you, but it's no longer upsetting. It's the same process with this idea of cognitive exposure. You essentially want to take these type 2 worries and think about them over and over and over again to their really horrible end, the most distressing parts of it that you don't let yourself think about. With these type 2 worries, what often happens with people is their mind will go to a certain point in the worry and then they say, okay, you know what, that's too much. I can't take it anymore. And they stop thinking about it. And so it's almost like one of those old-fashioned record players, and it just keeps skipping. So it plays the same part of the song and just keeps skipping over and over and over again. So it's not playing the song all the way through. And that's what happens with these type 2 worries. A person doesn't allow themselves to think about the type 2 worries all the way through to the horrible end that they imagine. But by doing this, and by doing this repeatedly, essentially what you're doing is you're giving the worries the airtime. So it's almost like these worries want their airtime. They want you to think about them. And so you give the worries their airtime and you think about them in concentrated ways until the emotion essentially drains from the worry. And if the emotion drains from the worry, it's not going to be so upsetting when it comes up. And if it's not so upsetting when it comes up, you're probably not going to try and push the thoughts out of your mind. So it's a bit of a strange concept to wrap your head around, but it works. And in fact, this is the exact same treatment approach that we use for people with post-traumatic stress disorder. The difference between post-traumatic stress disorder and this is that in post-traumatic stress disorder, the traumatic event has happened to the person. It's happened to the person in their past. Whereas in generalized anxiety disorder and excessive worry, the traumatic event is something that a person imagines happening in the future. But it's the same process to drain the emotion out of the thought. So how do you go about doing this cognitive exposure? How do you do it? Well, cognitive exposure is different than worrying about the worry. With cognitive exposure, the idea is you sit down and you write out a script, imagining your type 2 worry in all of the graphic, horrific, upsetting detail that you can imagine, all the way to the end, to those darkest parts that you don't even allow your mind to go to, that you don't let yourself go to. And you take your mind there. You write out this script detailing what you imagine happening. And I encourage a person to write out the script in the first person present tense. So like it's actually happening to them. Because what that can do is it puts you in the worry scene. It puts you in that scenario and allows you to sort of more closely imagine yourself in that situation. And so you write out this script. It should be anywhere from like 1 to 3 or 5 minutes long. It doesn't have to be any longer than that. But you want to include as much detail as possible, as much sensory detail, as much thought detail as you can. So I'll give you an example of a script. Now, this is a script for someone imagining that they're going to die of cancer. So the script may go something like this. I was diagnosed with my cancer a few weeks ago, and it has spread rapidly through my body. The cancer is my fault because I didn't take care of myself. I had a unhealthy lifestyle. I ate poorly. I spend too much time in the sun without sunscreen. So it's all my fault that this is happening to me. I've gone through a series of upsetting and painful procedures. The treatments have caused me to lose my hair. I've lost weight. I'm fatigued. I'm exhausted all the time. I'm now coughing up blood, and it makes me sick every time I see myself in the mirror. I know now that I'm on my deathbed. I can feel my life draining from me. This was all my fault. I did this to myself. And now here I am in this hospital bed, having just soiled myself, and I can smell how awful it smells. And I feel exhausted and weak. I can't even call out for help. I'm in this darkened hospital room, in this darkened ward, and I see only shadows in the background. I know my death is coming soon, and it's going to be a bleak emptiness that I'm going to face for eternity. So now, notice that may not be something that you worry about. But that type of script, it's descriptive enough that it's like this kick in the gut. It should make you uncomfortable. And so the idea is you write out this script about this really horrific type 2 worry, whatever your type 2 worry is, whatever the worry that you're struggling with is, you write out a script as detailed as possible. And once you have that script, the idea is to take 30, 45 minutes, an hour a day, and read that script over and over and over again. So you read the script all the way through, and I encourage people to make a note of how upsetting or distressing it was on a scale from 0 to 10, where 0 is not distressing at all, 10 is extremely distressing, extremely upsetting. So after every time you read the script, you make a rating from 0 to 10. Then immediately you read it again from 0 to 10, make a rating. And again, and again, at least 10 or 15 times in that 30 to 45 minutes to an hour chunk of time that you're setting aside to do this. You want to do this at a time when you're not going to be distracted. So turn off your cell phone, sort of get away so that people aren't going to be distracting you. Now, it's key to understand this is going to be very distressing. It's going to be very, very difficult to do. It's going to make you feel very uncomfortable. And so if you're feeling uncomfortable even at the thought of doing it, that's normal. This isn't something that anyone should look forward to doing. Because the whole idea is to bring up the emotion, to bring up the distress, and to learn to cope with it and to let it just go away on its own, like watching that horror movie over and over and over again. So you do these ratings, and what you should find is that within a session of doing this, so from the beginning where you start with a rating, the first time you read it maybe a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10, and then you read it over 15 times, what you should find is that at the end of that 15th time of reading it, your rating should be lower, right? The first time you do it, maybe your rating at the 15th time is a 5 or a 6 out of 10. And then you do it again the next day and the day after that. And I encourage people to do this for a week or two. And what they find is that over the course of that week or two, the ratings both within each session tend to decline, and between each session, they tend to decline. So after a couple of weeks of doing this, the distress at the 10th or 15th day that you've done this, those distress scores are a lot lower than they were in the first day. So this is, like I said, a very challenging exercise. This isn't something that you want to do with every worry because it takes a lot of time and it's quite distressing. So you want to use this on those worries that are particularly problematic, those worries that come up again and again that you're really struggling with. Because this works. It's not pleasant, but it works. So I liken it a lot to that Buckley's cough syrup commercial. It tastes awful, but it works. That's kind of what this cognitive exposure is all about as well. It tastes awful, but it does work. As we've gone along, we've talked about lots of different tools for managing these various factors that maintain worry. We've talked about worry awareness training and categorizing worries as type 1 or type 2 worries. We've talked about the importance of building tolerance for uncertainty through behavioral experiments with uncertainty. We've talked about ways of challenging worry beliefs. We've talked about improving problem orientation by recognizing problems earlier on, by normalizing the occurrence of problems, and by reframing problems as opportunities instead of threats. We've talked about cognitive exposure and how that can be used to help address and deal with type 2 worries. So we've talked about a whole bunch of skills, a whole bunch of tools. And for a lot of my clients, when we get to this point of therapy, they've learned a lot, but there's a little bit of confusion in terms of like all of these skills seem a little bit disconnected and they don't really understand how they all come together and how to use all of them to effectively manage worry. And that's what I want to talk about in this video, exactly how we put together these tools and skills, the order in which to use them, kind of like a recipe to best manage worry. So the very first step in terms of this worry management recipe goes back to the very first tool we talked about, which is worry awareness training. You have to be aware and you have to know what it is that you're worrying about. And then you categorize the worries. Once you've identified the worry, you think about it and categorize it. Is this a type 1 worry or is this a type 2 worry? So let's start with type 1 worries. What would be the formula or the recipe for dealing with type 1 worries? And as a review, type 1 worries are worries about actual, current, real problems, problems that you're actually experiencing in this moment. So the first step with type 1 worries is you have identified it as a type 1 worry. Well, the next thing to do is to think about, are there any ways in which I'm being intolerant of uncertainty in this situation? Are there various things that I'm doing that may be avoiding or trying to eliminate uncertainty with this problem? So, for example, let's imagine that I have a problem like I've just gotten into an argument with my friend, and me and my friend haven't spoken in a couple of weeks. So it's a current problem that I'm dealing with. Well, what are some of the ways in which I might be intolerant of uncertainty in this situation? Well, I may be avoiding reaching out to my friend because I'm concerned that they're still upset with me. And so I'm engaging in avoidance. Or I may be checking in with other friends and seeking reassurance about, what I did. Was it wrong? Would they be upset with me? How would they react? Have they heard anything from my friend about it? So thinking about all of the things that I might be doing that are intolerant of uncertainty and thinking about what is the opposite that I could be doing? What are things that I can be doing to tolerate uncertainty in that situation? So that's the step, looking for opportunities to be more tolerant of uncertainty or to be tolerant of uncertainty with this problem. After that, after I've worked on tolerating uncertainty, the next thing I want to do is to think about which of the worry beliefs might be playing a role in this worry. So I might hold some worry beliefs that maybe me worrying about
my relationship with my friend, it demonstrates that I'm caring. It demonstrates that I'm conscientious. It demonstrates that I'm a responsible person who cares about his relationships. That's why I'm worrying about it. So once I've identified that worry belief that's continuing to have me worry about this, I can begin to challenge that worry belief using some of those challenging questions I talked about in a previous video. So I've engaged in trying to tolerate uncertainty. I've identified and challenged my worry beliefs. The next step is to deal with that negative problem orientation. So recognizing the problem earlier on, well, I've identified the worry, so that's good. Now I want to normalize that problems are normal. It's not that there's something wrong with me, that I'm having this problem with my friend. It's that these things kind of happen. And then I want to try and reframe this problem as an opportunity. So I can look at this as this is terrible. Me and my friend are never going to get back together. If I try to reach out to my friend, they're going to be really upset with me, and it's going to lead to an even worse outcome. So I'm thinking about all of the threat associated with this worry. But the goal here is for me to try to reframe that as what's the opportunity or the challenge here. Well, maybe the opportunity in this is for me and my friend to be able to work out this problem. And by doing so, we actually get closer because we've gone through it, we've worked out our difficulties, and now we're at a better place than we were even before the problem came up. So then I can engage in the problem solving steps because I've I've identified the problem, I've reframed it, I've normalized it, that negative problem orientation is out of the way, and now I can actually engage in some of those problem solving steps that we talked about in a previous video. So identifying the problem, identifying the goal, brainstorming possible solutions of how I can fix this relationship with my friend, evaluating those possible solutions and picking one, developing a plan for what I'm going to do, and actually utilizing the plan or implementing the plan, and then seeing whether or not it's helped, seeing whether or not me and my friend have resolved our difficulties. So that if I do all of those things and if I solve the problem at the end, I'm no longer going to be worrying about this issue. So that's the recipe for how you deal with type 1 worries. You identify it and label it as a type 1 worry. You look for tolerating uncertainty opportunities as a type 1 worry. You challenge the worry beliefs that are contributing to this type 1 worry. You address the negative problem orientation, and you engage in problem solving. So it's actually pretty similar to the order in which I presented these tools as we were going through the videos. And that was for a reason, because that's kind of the order in which you want to use these tools. So that's a type 1 worry. Well, how do you deal with type 2 worries? Well, if you remember, type 2 worries are worries about future or potential problems. Problems that haven't happened yet, problems that may never happen. And so what's the approach for dealing with these type 2 worries? Well, the first few steps are actually identical for dealing with type 1 worries. So you've identified the worry, you've labeled it as a type 2 worry. The first thing to do is to look for opportunities to tolerate uncertainty. So for example, if my type 2 worry is I've planned my one vacation a year to be a sunny, warm weather destination vacation, and I'm starting to worry about the weather, and that the weather is going to be terrible, and that it's going to rain the whole time, and my vacation is going to be ruined. And this is something that really sort of bothers me, or is really concerning for me, and that I'm worrying about it a lot. Well, thinking about what are some of the things that I might be doing to be more, what are some of the things that I could do to be more tolerant of uncertainty in this situation? Well, maybe I shouldn't be checking the weather and the weather forecast for my hot weather destination. Maybe I shouldn't be checking the Farmer's Almanac to see historically what the weather was like at that destination over the time that I'm going to be traveling there. Maybe I shouldn't be looking into all of the possible things I could do if the weather is not great or if it is raining the whole time. Because those are all things that are designed to eliminate uncertainty. And so, what I want to do is to try to be just more tolerant of uncertainty in this situation and not do those intolerant of uncertainty behaviors. So, once I've worked through the things that I can do to be more tolerant of uncertainty, I may want to challenge some of the beliefs about the usefulness of this worry. So maybe I hold a belief that worrying about this means that I'm kind of preparing myself, so that if I worry about it ahead of time, if when I get to my vacation it is raining, I'll kind of have prepared myself emotionally for it, and so I won't be so upset. Well, identifying that worry belief and challenging that worry belief, as we talked about in the Challenging Worry Beliefs video. So now I've gone through, I'm tolerating uncertainty, I've identified and challenged the worry beliefs. The next step I want to do, if I'm still worrying about this, is to engage in that cognitive exposure exercise that I talked about, which is essentially to write out a script, imagining that worst case scenario, imagining that I end up on this vacation and it's pouring the whole time, and imagining how bad it would be to its very end. And then reviewing that script over and over and over again to essentially drain the emotion out of it. So, that's the process for type 2 worries. And if you notice, the first few steps are identical to the steps in type 1 worries. All that differs is what you do at the end, whether it's cognitive exposure or whether or not it's problem solving. So those are the recipes. That's the order in which you want to use these tools. And that's how these tools sort of fit together to work together for the most effective worry management. Now, one of the things that can come up is sometimes my clients will say, okay, I understand this, and I understand it makes sense what I do with type 1 worries. It makes sense what I do with type 2 worries. But what if I make a mistake at that very first step? What if I label a type 1 worry as a type 2 worry? So, for example, it's a worry about an actual problem, but I mislabel it as a type 2 worry. So I think it's a worry about a future or potential problem. Well, whenever clients bring this up, I say, okay, well, let's walk through what would happen then. Well, so it's a type 1 worry in actuality, but I imagine it a type 2 worry. So what I'm going to do with dealing with a type 2 worry is I'm going to be tolerating uncertainty. Well, I'd be doing that for a type 1 worry anyway. I'd be identifying and challenging worry beliefs. Well, be doing that for a type 1 worry anyway. Then I'd engage in cognitive exposure. So I write out a script and start working on a script about the worst case scenario that I can imagine in this. Well, that wouldn't really work for a type 1 worry, because a type 1 worry is about an actual problem. But what will happen, and this has happened with some of my clients before, is they start working on a worry script and they start reviewing the worry script. And what they find is that they start to get really frustrated because they're reviewing a worry script about something they have control over. And then once they identify that, no, wait, this is something I have control over, then they can recognize, you know what, this isn't actually a type 2 worry. This is a type 1 worry. And at that point, they then shift to dealing with it in terms of addressing the negative problem orientation and engaging in problem solving. So there's nothing really wrong with misclassifying a type 1 worry as a type 2 worry, because once you get to the cognitive exposure part of the recipe, you'll recognize that this cognitive exposure isn't working because I can do something about it. And once I recognize I can do something about it, I can then shift over to addressing it like a type 1 worry.
So think about what would happen if it's actually a type 2 worry, but I misclassify it as a type 1 worry. So it's a worry about a future or potential problem, but I deal with it like it's a worry about a current problem. Well, the first few steps are going to be identical. I'm going to be tolerating uncertainty. I'm going to be identifying and challenging worry beliefs. The only difference is now I'm going to start to engage in problem solving, or I'm going to try to engage in problem solving for a problem that doesn't exist. Well, as soon as I start to try and engage in problem solving, I'm going to recognize that the problem doesn't currently exist. And once I'm aware that the problem doesn't currently exist, that's my cue that this is actually a type 2 worry. And so then I can shift to working on a cognitive exposure script if I need to. So the idea here is not to worry about or not to get too preoccupied with having to have it perfectly clear. Is this a type 1 worry? Is this a type 2 worry? Like I said from the very beginning, just do your best. Just sort of do your best to try and figure out if this is type 1 or type 2 and just go with it. Because the process is self-correcting. The first few steps are going to be identical, whether or not it's type 1 or a type 2 worry. And if you misclassify the worries, it's okay because you'll recognize that as soon as you start doing either the cognitive exposure or the problem solving. And you'll recognize that it's not working, which means that you've probably misclassified the worry. And so you just need to shift to whatever tool you need to use for the other type of worry. For some people, they find that some of their worries don't really fit nicely into this type 1, type 2 categorization. That there seems to be a bit of type 1 component to the worry, but also a type 2 component to the worry. So the worry is kind of more complex. There's kind of this mix of type 1 and type 2 worries. So the question becomes, how exactly do I deal with this? How do I deal with these complex worries? And so, what I wanted to talk about is kind of a formula or recipe for these complex worries that actually follows quite nicely from the previous video. So, if you think about the very first step in worry management, we identify it as recognizing what it is that you're worrying about and labeling the worry. Is it type 1 or is it type 2? Well, in this situation, what you're doing is you're recognizing and you're identifying the worry and recognizing that it's both type 1 and type 2. It's a mixed worry. So I'll give you an example of a mixed worry. Suppose I have a business, and during the busiest time of the year, I have a whole bunch of staff members quit or get sick. And so I don't have enough staff to be able to fill all of the orders that I have. And so then I start to worry, well, this is going to really upset a lot of my customers. And what if those customers decide that they're going to go shop somewhere else? And then this will have a real negative impact on my business, and my business is going to decline and maybe shut down in the future because I'm not going to be able to recover from this setback. So it's got a bit of a type 1 component to it, that I'm dealing with a problem right now of my staff all either quitting or getting sick and not having enough staff to complete all of the orders. So that's the type 1 component of the worry. But the type 2 component of the worry is my business suffering in the future because of this, and ultimately me losing my business because all of my customers have gone somewhere else. That's the type 2 component of this worry. So we've got a little bit of a mix. Our type 1 worry has spiraled into a type 2 worry. So what do you do with this? I've identified it as a complex worry. I've identified it as a mixed worry. What do I do to manage this worry? Well, very first step, as we talked about in the previous video, is to look for ways in which I can be more tolerant of uncertainty in this situation. How do I tolerate uncertainty? Or another way of thinking about it is, what are the ways in which I'm being intolerant of uncertainty in this situation? So maybe what I'm doing is I'm avoiding uh, notifying my customers that their shipment is going to be delayed because I'm concerned that if I notify them, they're going to cancel the order. Well, all that's really doing is maintaining my worry about what my customers are thinking. So a more tolerating uncertainty thing to do in that situation is to notify them, call them, explain to them what's going on, and see what happens. So thinking about what are the ways in which I can be more tolerant of uncertainty in this situation. Second thing you do, like with all worries, is to identify and challenge worry beliefs. To think about what are the worry beliefs that might be playing a role in me worrying about these series of events and the future series of events. Do I think that worrying about this situation, worrying about not having enough staff to fulfill these orders, is worrying about it going to help me solve that problem? Well, then I can think about the tools that I've learned to help me challenge that belief that worry aids in problem solving. So I identify and challenge the worry beliefs that might be contributing to my worry. So I've gone through those steps, and those are the same steps we use regardless of the worry, regardless of whether it's a type 1 or a type 2 worry. But now what do I do? It's still there. Maybe I'm still worrying about it, and it's this mixed worry. It's still got type 1 and it's still got type 2 components to it. Well, what I recommend for clients in this type of situation is to focus on it like it's a type 1 worry. So look at the negative problem orientation that may be contributing to the worry. So trying to reframe the problem as an opportunity. What's the opportunity in this situation for me? Well, maybe the opportunity is for me to figure out ways of becoming more streamlined in how I get my product out to my customers. Maybe I can figure out more efficient ways of fulfilling the orders with fewer staff, which will help me grow my business in the future. So there's opportunities in this, and so if I can reframe the problem rather than just seeing it as a threat, I reframe it as an opportunity, then I'm more likely to then be able to engage in some problem solving with this. So I then engage in those problem solving steps to try and address the problem of not having enough staff to fulfill these orders. So I engage in those 6 problem solving steps that I talked about in an earlier video. So now I've engaged in effective problem solving. Suppose I've solved the problem. So I've figured out ways of either hiring new temporary staff or being more efficient and being able to fulfill these orders with the staff that I have. So I've solved that problem. Well, there's a good chance that by solving the problem, I've now eliminated the type 2 worry part of this worry as well. So I've eliminated the type 1 because I've addressed the problem, but now that I've addressed the problem, maybe I'm not going to worry about losing all my customers anymore, and maybe I'm not going to worry about becoming bankrupt and losing my company. So by addressing it as a type 1 worry, I may fully solve the type 2 worry part of this and fully address the complex worry by just treating it like it's a type 1 worry. But suppose that I solved the problem, I've addressed the type 1 worry part of it, but there's still this niggling worry that I have about, yeah, that was close. What if in the future my business falls apart? And I start to keep worrying about that type 2 part of the worry. Well, if I'm still worrying about the type 2 part of the worry, then I can engage in the cognitive exposure we've talked about. So write out a script, imagining that worst case scenario, and then reviewing that script over and over and over again to essentially drain the emotion out of that worry. So these complex worries, even though they seem more complex, they're actually pretty straightforward in terms of the steps you need to use and the order you need to use them And they're very similar to how we deal with, be it a type 1 worry or be it a type 2 worry. So you essentially treat it like it's a type 1 worry. You identify the worry, tolerate uncertainty, challenge worry beliefs, address the negative problem orientation, and engage in problem solving. At that point, if there's any type 2 part of the worry left over, then you engage in the cognitive exposure. So, what I like about this is that it flows nicely with what we talked about in the previous video about our recipe for managing worries, and that complex worries are actually not all that complex in terms of what you need to do to address the worry. So, what we've done over the last 14 videos is talk about a number of worry management skills and tools. We started out with our basic engine of worry. We talked about the role that intolerance of uncertainty plays as the fuel that drives the worry engine. We've talked about the role of beliefs about the usefulness of worry and how those beliefs can maintain excessive, difficult to control worry. We've talked about the role of negative problem orientation and ineffective problem solving in keeping worry about current problems going. We've talked about how cognitive avoidance can maintain worries about future or potential problems. We've also talked about a flowchart for and recipe for how you go about managing different types of worries, including type 1 worries, type 2 worries, and mixed or complex worries. So we have talked about a lot of tools. We've talked about a lot of skills, and you may have learned a lot by watching all of these videos. So the question becomes, okay, well, what do I do with this now moving forward? Now, one of the things I want to point out is that this model of worry that I'm talking about here isn't just something that I've imagined. It's actually based in a lot of scientific research that has backed this model of worry and backed this treatment protocol that I've been walking you through. This treatment protocol is based on the research and work of a really brilliant psychologist named Michel Dugas, who's at Concordia University in Montreal. And what Dugas and his colleagues did was they developed this protocol and then they administered it to a number of people who worried excessively, people with generalized anxiety disorder. And what they found was that at the end of treatment, not surprisingly, the vast majority of people who went through this treatment showed significant improvements in their worry levels, in terms of their anxiety levels. So it showed that at the end of treatment, the treatment had actually worked. It had actually been really effective in terms of helping people better manage their worry. But what they did was they took the research even a step further and they followed up the people 2 years later. And what they found was actually quite encouraging. They found that the majority of people who went through this treatment protocol at 2 years later were still showing the same gains and the same improvement that they had demonstrated at the end of treatment. And so what that means is that the treatment wasn't just effective as long as the person was in the treatment or was receiving the therapy, but that they maintained the progress 2 years later. And so there are lasting improvements and lasting gains from this treatment. But what they also found was that there was a subset of people who actually showed even further improvements at the 2 year mark, that they demonstrated even lower levels of worry and even lower levels of anxiety 2 years later than they did when they stopped the therapy. So what this demonstrates is that for the most of the people, the vast majority of people who go through this treatment and who go through this treatment protocol actually maintain their gains or show even further improvement 2 years later. And that's great to know. So what it means is that this treatment isn't just something that you do and then
the benefits go away. It's something in which the benefits are maintained for at least 2 years, likely beyond. But in the research, what they also found was that there was a small subset of people who experienced a recurrence of symptoms. So at 2 years later, they are actually demonstrating higher levels of worry and higher levels of anxiety than they were when they stopped treatment. And so what Dugas and his colleagues looked at was, what was the difference between these groups of people? What was it about the people who showed a recurrence of symptoms, who showed a deterioration in their level of worry and anxiety at 2 years compared to the people who maintained their gains or who even got better at 2 years? And not surprisingly, what they found was that the people who maintained their gains or who continued to get better at 2 years, those were the people who were still using the worry management skills. Whereas the people who showed a worsening in their symptoms at 2 years, they were people who, at the end of treatment, had felt better, and then they were just happy to be done with excessive worry. They were happy to be over it, and they just wanted to move on with their lives. And so they stopped using the skills. And this is one of the things about this type of treatment or this approach for worry management. It's a skills-based form of treatment. It is not a worry cure, it's worry management. Because the reality is, everyone worries, and everyone will always worry. But this treatment isn't about preventing worry, it's about helping a person control and manage the worry so it's not so excessive or interfering in a person's life. And so if you stop using the tools, then they're going to stop being of benefit. And you're likely going to fall back into old habits of excessive worry and high anxiety. And so it really is about, what can you do to make sure that you're continuing to use your tools? What can you do to ensure that you're maintaining the gains and using these worry management skills on an ongoing basis? And I want to give a few tips about how to do that in this video. So the first thing to realize, and the first thing that's really important to understand, is that there will be times when you will experience a resurgence in worry. There will be times in your life moving forward where you will experience higher levels of worry because life stressors will come up. Things will come up, and we know that life stress tends to exacerbate and increase worry for people. Now, there's a difference between a temporary increase in worry and a full relapse of worry. So what you want to do is to take these life stressors and to take these the increase in worry that comes with these life stressors and really apply the worry management tools to address the worries as they come up and help you get through those life stressors and get through the worries associated with those life stressors. Now, sometimes life stressors are unexpected. They come out of the blue. I suddenly lose my job. Someone in my family suddenly gets sick. And I didn't anticipate it. There was no way I could have anticipated it. There's not really much you can do about those types of stressors. However, there are some life stressors that are predictable. And so what you want to do, one of the first things you can do to ensure that you're maintaining your use of these worry management skills, is to plan ahead for future stressors. So for example, some predictable life stressors are the holiday season, Christmas and New Year's. A lot of people find that time of year to be extremely stressful. Well, that's an example of a predictable stressor. So if you know that the holiday season's coming up, the idea is to plan ahead for what it is that you're going to do to better manage your worry, or to manage your worry that comes up with that stress. So it may be that you plan to do more formal tolerating uncertainty experiments during that time. It may be that you're more hyper aware and hyper tuned to those problems that tend to come up for you over and over again. And so you can identify those problems earlier on during the holiday season and then be able to kick into your reframing and problem solving. So you want to plan ahead. And if you can plan ahead for foreseeable futures and to develop a plan for what you're going to be doing to manage your worry during that time, that can go a long way in preventing you from spiraling into excessive worry and high levels of anxiety during those stressful times. Second thing you can do to maintain your worry is to think about what are some early warning signs that you may want to pay attention to that would indicate to you that you're starting to slip back into old excessive worry habits. Now, the thing is, people don't just tend to start worrying excessively one day. It's, for a lot of people, it's something that they've done their whole life. So you may have gone through these worry management videos, you've learned a lot of skills, and you're using them, and you're able to really manage your worry quite well. But it's important to remember that you've only been managing your worry quite well for a few weeks now, compared to maybe a lifetime of excessive worry. So that lifetime of excessive worry is kind of like an old habit. And so it's really easy to fall back and slip back into those old worry, excessive worry habits. So the idea is to think about what are some clear signs for me that are going to be like early warning signs that tell me that I'm starting to slide down an old familiar path of excessive worry. And you want to try to make these as specific as possible so that they can be your early alarm or your early warning sign that something bad or something wrong is going on in terms of worrying excessively. So things like noticing that you've been having trouble sleeping for the last 4 nights in a row. Things like noticing that you haven't been doing any tolerating uncertainty experiments for a couple of weeks. Noticing that maybe you've been avoiding some social interactions because you've been a little bit more uncomfortable or experiencing a bit more stress. Those behavioral indicators, those behavioral signs that maybe you're sliding back into old habits. Because once you recognize that maybe you're starting that slide back into old habits, you can then kick into using your worry management skills again and really focusing on those worry management skills to get back on track and to ensure that that little lapse doesn't lead to a full relapse in terms of high levels of worry, high levels of anxiety. Because it's a lot easier to make a course correction earlier on than it is when you find yourself worrying excessively again. And the third tip for ensuring that you're maintaining your progress is to have a plan for what you would do if you ever did find yourself worrying excessively again. Now, I know for a lot of people, they don't like to think about this. They want to be positive and optimistic about being able to manage their worry moving forward and that it's not going to be a problem for them again. But I like to think of this more like an insurance policy. So the idea is to sit down and spend some time writing out a recipe or a formula for exactly what it is that you would do. What are the various steps that you would go through if you noticed yourself worrying excessively again? So it may be bookmarking or highlighting some of these videos and going back to watching some of these videos. It may be that you've taken some notes from these videos. So it's about reviewing your notes and having a plan for what it is that I'm going to do if I catch myself worrying excessively again. And you can have this instruction manual and you can fold it up, put it in an envelope, and then right on the outside of the envelope, open in case of worry emergency. Because if you ever catch yourself worrying excessively again at some point in the future, it's really difficult in that moment to remember exactly what it is that you need to do to better manage or better control your worry. So, what you can do if you ever find yourself in that situation is you go to this envelope, you open it up, and then you just read the instructions that you have come up with for you. And so it can be a nice insurance policy, and hopefully you never need it because you've been planning for stressors, you've been catching yourself in those early warning signs that you might be falling back into old habits, and you're continuing to use the worry management skills that you've learned on an ongoing basis. Maybe you never need to open that letter, but it's there for you just in case you need it. So, those are some tips for maintaining the progress that you've made through using these worry management tools that I've been talking about. And that's the end of our 14-part series on worry management. You've learned a lot. If you've watched all of the videos, you've learned a lot about worry. You've learned a lot about the factors that maintain worry and all of the tools that you can use to manage worry. This is not 5 simple steps to overcome worry. I've never believed in that sort of approach because I think it tends to invalidate and minimize worry. If it was as easy as 5 simple steps, nobody would be worrying excessively. Worry management is a lot of work, and it's a lot of hard work. But if you understand the skills and you understand the tools and you use them, these skills and tools work, and you can better control and better manage your worry. So I would love to hear your thoughts and comments about this. So please leave me some comments down below. If you like this video, if you found it helpful, please hit the like button. And if you'd like to see more of my videos, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, and you'll be alerted every Thursday when I post a new video. So thank you for making it all the way to the end of this video and all the way to the end of this 14-part series on worry management. It's been a lot, but I hope it's been helpful. So thank you, and I will see you in the next one.